Chapter 1. The Gilded Silence. The penthouse at the summit of the Uzumaki spire was a masterpiece of architectural hypocrisy. It was a gift from a grateful world, a sprawling, glass-walled monument to the hero of the leaf. It featured marble floors that stayed cold even in the summer and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of a village that had moved on without him. In the center of the living room, shrouded in the gray light of dawn, Naruto Uzumaki sat in a designer armchair that cost more than a genin's yearly earnings. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a statue carved from grief and jagged glass. The death of the internal sun. The most agonizing part of the great piece wasn't the physical scars, the thin, white lines that mapped his torso like a jagged geography of pain. It was the stillness. For 17 years, Naruto had lived with the roar of a god in his veins. The Nine-Tails chakra had been a constant hum, a secondary heartbeat that made him feel infinite. Now, there was only the cold. During the final confrontation, the seal hadn't just broken, it had imploded. The feedback loop of chakra exhaustion and physical trauma had scorched his pathways. To the medical ninjas, it was a biological tragedy. To Naruto, it was a lobotomy of the soul. He could no longer mold chakra. He couldn't walk on water, he couldn't climb trees with his feet, and he couldn't feel the life force of the forest. He was normal. He was mundane. He was a god cast down into the dirt, forced to breathe the heavy, stagnant air of the powerless. The withdrawal from chakra was a madness of its own. In the first year, he had clawed at his skin, trying to find the spark. In the second year, he stopped speaking. By the fourth year, he had mastered the art of the void. The routine of a ghost. Naruto's world had shrunk to exactly 3,000 square feet. He didn't have servants. He couldn't stand the way they looked at him, with eyes full of pity, as if they were looking at a dying dog. Once a week, and only when the moon was thin and the streets were empty, the hero would descend. He wore a heavy, charcoal gray hoodie, the hood pulled low to hide the iconic whiskers that had once been symbols of hope. He walked with a slight limp, a reminder of a shattered hip that chakra no longer knitted together. He moved through the Konoha market like a phantom. He would buy bread, some vegetables, and tea. He never bought ramen. The smell of miso and pork broth was a trigger for a life that felt like a movie he had watched a long time ago, a story about a boy who wanted to be Hokage. That boy was dead. This man was simply waiting for the clock to run out. The villagers would pass him by, complaining about taxes or the weather, never realizing that the man in the tattered hoodie was the reason they were alive to complain at all. Their peace was built on his ruin, and their ignorance was the sharpest blade they had ever stuck in his back. The metamorphosis. But seclusion does strange things to a mind built for battle. Without the external noise of missions and the internal roar of the fox, Naruto began to hear something else, the truth. He looked out at the village from his glass cage and saw the rot. He saw the same elders who had branded him a monster now branding him a national treasure to keep him quiet and tucked away. He saw a society that celebrated peace while sharpening knives behind closed doors. A new personality was brewing in the silence. It wasn't the hot-blooded rage of the past. It was a cold, crystalline cynicism. He began to find things funny. Not joyous funny, but the kind of humor found in a funeral where the priest trips into the grave. He would sit for hours in the dark, watching the flickering lights of the village, a slow, lopsided grin spreading across his face. The whiskers on his cheeks seemed to sharpen, his blue eyes losing their warmth and taking on the flat, reflective sheen of a predator watching a comedy. He had realized the ultimate joke. He had saved a world that didn't deserve it, and in return, they had given him a luxury prison and stripped him of his fire. He wasn't angry anymore. He was amused, and that was much, much more dangerous. The finality of the night. As the sun fully rose over the Hokage rock, Naruto stood up. His joints popped in the silence. He walked to the window and pressed a hand against the glass. Below, the new generation was running to the academy, laughing, dreaming of glory. Naruto leaned his forehead against the cold pane. He didn't feel a flicker of nostalgia. He only felt a deep, vibrating itch behind his eyes, a longing for the world to see the joke as clearly as he did. The hero was gone. The savior was a myth. Deep within the penthouse, a low, raspy sound broke the silence. It was a laugh. It started in his chest, dry and brittle, and echoed off the marble walls until the entire room seemed to be mocking the sunrise. Naruto Uzumaki closed his eyes, settled into his madness like a warm bath, and waited for the world to finally catch up to his despair. The silence of the penthouse was a physical weight, a thick shroud of dust motes and unsaid grievances. Naruto was staring at a dead television screen, watching his own distorted reflection when the sound arrived. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the tentative tap of a delivery person or the frantic pounding of a fan. It was rhythmic, patient, authoritative. It was a sound from a lifetime Naruto had tried to bury under a mountain of expensive marble and bitter thoughts. Naruto didn't move at first. He let the sound echo, savoring the intrusion as if it were a foul smell he wanted to analyze. Finally, with a sigh that sounded like grinding stones, he stood up. His joints popped, the dry, brittle sound of a body no longer lubricated by the fluid grace of chakra. He dragged his feet across the floor, the silk of his designer robe hissing against the tiles. He opened the heavy oak door just a crack. There stood Kakashi Hitaki, the sixth Hokage. He looked weary, the ceremonial robes hanging heavy on his shoulders, his silver hair catching the dim hallway light. One eye, the only one visible, crinkled into a familiar, practiced curve. "Yo, Naruto," Kakashi said, his voice casual, as if they were meeting at a ramen stand a decade ago. "It's been a while. Mind if I—" Slam. Naruto shut the door with a violence that shook the frame. He didn't even wait for the sentence to finish. He turned his back to the door, leaning his head against the wood, a frantic, jagged grin spreading across his face. The audacity of the world to knock on his door was the funniest thing he'd heard in weeks. Crack. The door didn't just open. It exploded inward with a burst of controlled force. The deadbolt snapped like a toothpick. Kakashi stepped over the threshold, his hand still resting on the handle, his expression shifting from casual to a masked flicker of annoyance. Now, Kakashi sighed, stepping into the dim sanctuary of the penthouse. "Is that any way to treat your former sensei? What's gotten into you? Can't I come by to visit my precious, dear student?" Naruto didn't flinch at the broken door. He turned slowly, his blue eyes flat, drained of the summer sky warmth they once held. He looked at the Hokage as if he were a bug pinned to a board. "I'm not your student, Kakashi," Naruto spat, the name tasting like copper in his mouth. "That boy died in the dirt 4 years ago. And I told you before, don't come here. This isn't a classroom. It's a tomb. Now get out before you ruin the decor with your self-righteousness." Kakashi didn't leave. Instead, he let out a short, dry chuckle. He wandered further into the room, his eyes scanning the empty bottles, the discarded books, and the general air of expensive decay. With an air of exaggerated comfort, the Hokage plopped himself down on the white velvet sofa, crossing his legs and leaning back. Still as hot-headed as ever, Kakashi mused, looking around. Though the scenery has certainly changed. Nice place. A bit quiet for a hero, don't you think? "I said get out," Naruto roared. The sound was raw, lacking the bass of the Nine-Tails' power, but filled with a terrifying, human vitriol. "You have no right to be here. This isn't your village. This is my cage. Get off the furniture and take your will of fire back to the office where you burn people alive for the sake of peace." Kakashi tilted his head, a mocking glint in his eye. My, so much venom. You're getting quite feisty in your old age, Naruto-chan." The suffix was a needle under the skin. It was an insult draped in childhood nostalgia, a reminder of the boy who used to scream for attention. In a blurred motion that was surprisingly fast for a man without chakra, Naruto's hand swept toward the kitchen island. His fingers closed around a sleek, silver steak knife. With a flick of his wrist, a movement born from a million hours of muscle memory, he launched the blade. The knife whistled through the air, aimed directly at the center of Kakashi's masked face. Kakashi didn't even stand up. He tilted his head a fraction of an inch to the left. The knife thudded into the expensive upholstery of the sofa, inches from his ear, vibrating with the force of the throw. "Oofy," Kakashi said, his voice dripping with forced playfulness. "You really are fierce today. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were actually trying to kill your poor old teacher. Such a scary look you have now." Naruto was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He stood in the center of the room, trembling not with fear, but with an electric, manic energy. He wanted to scream, to laugh, to tear the walls down. Kakashi's humor suddenly vanished, replaced by a sharp, piercing stillness. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at the broken man before him. The mask of the cool sensei stayed on, but the tone shifted. "Tell me, Naruto," Kakashi said softly, his gaze sweeping over the darkened windows. "How long are you going to sit in this expensive dark? The world outside is moving. It's boring. It's peaceful. It's exactly what you fought for." Naruto let out a bark of laughter that sounded like breaking glass. "It's a lie." "Maybe," Kakashi conceded. He stood up, smoothing out his robes, ignoring the knife still stuck in the couch. He walked toward the door he had just broken, then stopped, looking back over his shoulder at the shadow of the hero. "But even lies are better when you aren't staring at them alone. So, tell me, what do you say to the idea of finally leaving this house? Not to buy bread, not to hide, just to leave." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on, a suffocating mix of Kakashi's forced nonchalance and Naruto's jagged, electric resentment. Kakashi remained by the broken door, his lone eye scanning Naruto with a clinical, yet strangely affectionate, scrutiny. "You know, Naruto," Kakashi started, his voice regained that light, airy quality that usually signaled a conversational trap. "Looking at you now, despite the brooding and the murder attempts, you've actually grown up to be quite a handsome man. You have that mysterious noble look going for you. Very striking." Naruto let out a sound that wasn't a laugh. It was a dry, rasping bark. He ran a hand through his messy, unkempt blonde hair, his eyes reflecting the dull gray of the morning sky. "Handsome? Is that the new angle, Kakashi? Flattery? You're losing your touch." "I'm serious." Kakashi raised his hands in a defensive gesture. "The village girls still whisper about the hero of the leaf. The council thinks it's a waste. Honestly, what do you think about the idea of getting married? Settling down might give you something to do other than throwing kitchenware at your elders." Naruto took a slow, deliberate step toward the window, his back to the Hokage. "I don't need anyone, especially not some doll who wants to play house with a ghost. I'm fine with the silence. It's the only thing in this village that doesn't lie to me." "Ah, but it's not just about love anymore, Naruto-chan," Kakashi sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "You're a political asset. There are marriage proposals piling up on my desk from every great nation. Even the Sand Village has made inquiries. Temari, for instance. She's strong, sharp. She'd certainly keep you on your toes. It would solidify the alliance for decades." Naruto turned his head just enough to show a sneer that twisted his whisker marks. "Temari? You want to sell me off like a prize bull to the sand? To a girl who probably pities me as much as you do? Tell the council to take their alliances and burn them. I'm not a breeding project for their great peace. I want nothing to do with anyone. I am done being the Leaf's golden boy." The hatred in Naruto's voice was cold, a deep-seated loathing for the machinery of the shinobi world that Kakashi represented. Kakashi paused, a mischievous, slightly awkward glint entering his eye. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, if you're so adamantly against women, Naruto, I have to ask, are you, perhaps, into men? Is that the secret?" Naruto froze. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats before he turned fully to face Kakashi. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time in the conversation, He looked genuinely insulted, but in a way that sharpened his wit. "I'm not gay, Kakashi," Naruto said, his voice dropping an octave, dripping with venomous sarcasm. "I'm just not desperate. And besides, I'm definitely not like you." Kakashi blinked, his smile eye widening. "Like me? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means..." Naruto stepped closer, his presence looming despite his lack of chakra. "You're the one who's been single for 50 years, hiding behind those perverted little orange books and a mask. If you're so worried about the future of the village and the beauty of marriage, why haven't you found someone? Or is it that even the village elders can't find a woman, or a man, willing to put up with a man who can't even show his own face to his students?" Kakashi's posture slumped. His hand went instinctively to his mask, a visible sweat drop forming at his temple. "Hey, that was uncalled for. I'm a very busy man. Leading a village takes time. And I'll have you know, I'm a very desirable bachelor in some circles." "Sure you are," Naruto sneered. "In the circles of lonely old men who read Ika Ika in the dark. Don't lecture me on companionship when you're the loneliest person in this room, Kakashi. At least I'm honest about my isolation. You just hide yours behind a title." Kakashi looked like he'd been hit with a physical blow to his ego. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his dignity. "Moving on. The point is, people care about you. Team 7, they miss you. Sakura is constantly asking about your health. Sasuke, well, you know Sasuke, he doesn't say much, but he lingers in the village longer than he used to, waiting for you to come out. They want the team back together." Naruto's expression went from cynical to utterly dead. The mention of Team 7 didn't bring warmth. It brought back the smell of ozone and the sound of Chidori. "Team 7, Naruto whispered, the words sounding like a curse. "The girl who cried while I broke my bones for her, and the boy who spent his life trying to kill me. What a lovely family. Tell Sakura to save her medical jutsu for someone who still has a pulse. And tell Sasuke, tell him he's the only one who got what he wanted. He's free to wander. I'm the only one left in the cage." Naruto walked toward Kakashi, his movements predatory. He didn't use a jutsu. He just used his physical weight to shove the Hokage toward the broken doorway. "I've resigned, Kakashi. I resigned from the ninja way. I resigned from being a hero. And I'm resigning from being your precious student. This is my home, or my cell. Either way, you weren't invited." He gave Kakashi one final, forceful shove. The Hokage stumbled back into the hallway, his robes fluttering. "Naruto, wait." "Get out," Naruto said, his hand on the edge of the shattered door. "And tell the council if they send someone else. I won't use a steak knife next time. I'll use something that actually hurts." Slam. The door clicked shut, leaving Naruto alone in the shadows once more. He leaned his back against the wood, his chest heaving, a small, dark smile playing on his lips. He had humiliated the Hokage. It was the first time in years he had felt alive. The clinic was silent, smelling of sterilized steel and the faint, lingering scent of lavender incense that had long since burned out. Ino Yamanaka sat behind her mahogany desk, her chin resting on a trembling hand. In the moonlight filtering through the blinds, she looked ethereal, a porcelain doll carved from ice. Her long, platinum blonde hair was pulled back into its signature high ponytail, but several stray strands framed a face that was currently a mask of cold, simmering fury. She was beautiful, arguably the most beautiful woman in Konoha, but tonight, that beauty felt like a weapon she had forgotten how to wield. The stench of deception. It had been 3 weeks since the world she built had crumbled. It wasn't the heartbreak that people expected. She wasn't weeping over lost love or looking at old photographs. No, Ino Yamanaka was mourning something far more valuable: time. 2 years. 2 years she had spent cultivating Sai. She had taught him how to smile, how to interpret human emotions, how to move past his root-indoctrinated coldness. She had treated him like a project, a garden she had meticulously weeded and watered. And for what? To find him in a quiet corner of a tea house with a girl, a nobody, a civilian with plain hair and even plainer aspirations. It wasn't the infidelity that burned, it was the insult. Sai hadn't just cheated, he had lied. He had looked her in the eyes with that practiced, hollow smile she had helped him build and told her he was on a mission. He had used the very tools of intimacy she gave him to deceive her. 2 years, she whispered, her voice a jagged edge in the quiet room. 730 days of my life, wasted on a hollow shell. She looked down at a medical file on her desk, but the words blurred. Her anger wasn't a fire, it was a flood. It was the realization that she, the greatest mind-walker in the land of fire, had been played by a man who didn't even have a real name. She felt a profound sense of disgust, not just for him, but for a society that expected her to just move on and find another suitor. The shattered healer. Ino stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floorboards. The sound felt good, harsh and disruptive. She paced the length of her office, her heels clicking like a countdown. She was a psychiatrist. She was supposed to be the one who fixed the broken. She spent her days listening to the traumas of shinobi who had seen too much blood, patching up the cracked psyches of a village that claimed to be at peace. But who was fixing her? The hypocrisy of Konoha felt heavier than ever. The village was thriving, the markets were full, and the war was a fading memory. But beneath the surface, it was a den of vipers. Everyone was lying. The couple she saw in the street were pretending. The leaders were pretending. And she, the head of the sensory division, was expected to keep the illusion alive. She stopped in front of the large bay window that overlooked the village. A village in the dark. From this height, Konoha should have looked like a jewel. Instead, to Ino's eyes, it looked like a graveyard. The lights of the street lamps flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the rooftops. The great stone faces of the Hokage loomed in the distance, their stone eyes watching over a people who had become soft and forgetful. "Look at them," she muttered, her breath fogging the glass, sleeping soundly while the people who saved them rot in the dark. She thought of her father. She thought of the war. She thought of the screaming silence in her own mind. The betrayal by Sai had been the final thread to snap. It had stripped away her patience for the village way. She didn't want to heal anyone anymore. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tear the mask off every happy person in this town and show them the ugliness they were ignoring. The village wasn't bright. It was dark, deeply, fundamentally dark. And as she stared out at the shadows, she realized she was no longer afraid of the night. She was starting to prefer it. Ino pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her anger cooling into a sharp, focused cynicism. She was done with projects. She was done with fixing hollow men. Little did she know, on the other side of the village, in a penthouse that touched the stars, another broken soul was laughing in the dark. The hero and the healer were drifting toward the same abyss, and the village that betrayed them both was about to find out what happens when the two most dangerous minds in the leaf decide they've had enough of the light. Chapter 2. The Golden Handcuffs. The silence in Ino's office was broken not by a gentle tap, but by a heavy, authoritative thud against the wood. Ino didn't turn away from the window. The reflection of her own cold, sharp eyes stared back at her from the glass. "Enter," she said, her voice like a snapping frost. The door creaked open, and the rhythmic sound of sandals on the hardwood floor followed. Kakashi Hitaki stepped in, his Hokage robes swirling slightly around his ankles. He didn't wait for an invitation to sit. He leaned against the edge of her desk, looking at the back of her head. "You look like you're plotting a revolution, Ino," Kakashi said, his tone deceptively light. "Maybe I am," she replied, finally turning around. Her eyes swept over him with a lack of respect that would have earned a genin a month of manual labor. "What do you want, Kakashi? If it's about the sensory reports, they're on the desk." Actually, Kakashi reached into his robe and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope. He tossed it onto the mahogany surface. It landed with a dull, promising thwack. "I'm here with an official S-rank assignment, one that falls directly under your unique expertise." Ino eyed the envelope. She reached out, sliding her manicured finger under the seal and peering inside. Her breath caught for a fleeting second. It wasn't just a mission fee. It was a small fortune, enough to buy out half the flower shops in the country and live in luxury for a decade without seeing a single patient. That's a lot of blood money, Ino murmured. Looking up, her curiosity finally piqued. What's the catch? Who do I have to kill? Or whose mind do I have to break? Kakashi's visible eye crinkled, but the smile didn't reach his soul. Neither. I want you to fix someone. I need you to take over the psychiatric care of Naruto Uzumaki. The silence that followed was deafening. Ino's face contorted, her expression shifting from greed to a deep, visceral disgust. She pushed the envelope away as if it were contaminated with a virus. No, she said flatly. Absolutely not. Ino. I said no, she snapped, standing up, her hands slamming onto the desk. Naruto? You want me to treat him? He's a hollow shell, Kakashi. He's a bitter, broken relic who thinks the world owes him everything because he lost his spark. We aren't compatible. We never were. Even in the academy, he was loud, annoying, and lacked the basic emotional intelligence to understand the word no. Now, he's just a ghost in a penthouse. Send Sakura. Send a monk. Send anyone else. Kakashi didn't flinch. He remained calm, the steady anchor in the room. Sakura can't do it. She's too close. She still sees the boy who saved the world. And the monks? He'd laugh them out of the building. You're the only one, Ino. You're sharp. You're cynical. And right now, you're just as angry at this village as he is. You're the only person who won't flinch when he shows you his teeth. Ino let out a harsh, mocking laugh. Is that what I am now? The village's cage cleaner for the great hero? I have my own problems, Kakashi. I don't have the patience to sit and listen to a man-child moan about his lost chakra. He's not a man-child anymore, Kakashi said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. He's changed. He's evolved. Honestly, he's become quite the specimen. He's taller, broader. He's got this dangerous, elegant edge to him now. To be blunt, Ino, he's significantly more impressive than that artist you've been wasting your time with. Ino's eyes flared at the mention of Sai. Don't you dare bring that traitor into this. I'm just saying, Kakashi shrugged, playing a dangerous game. You want to build your reputation? You want to be the woman who tamed the beast that the world broke? If you succeed, you'll be a legend. And who knows? He leaned in, a spark of mischief returning. You might even find him charming. He's certainly more masculine than a man who uses ink for blood. Maybe you'll even fall in love with the tragedy. In love? With Naruto? Ino sneered, her lip curling in derision. I'd rather marry a cactus. He's a nuisance. A loud-mouthed, orange-wearing failure. He doesn't wear orange anymore, Kakashi whispered. And he isn't loud. He's quiet now. That's what makes him terrifying. Kakashi stood up straight, his playfulness evaporating. He looked at her with the cold eyes of a leader. This isn't a request, Ino. This is an order. If you refuse an S-rank mandate during a state of psychological emergency, I'll have your medical license revoked. I'll shut down this clinic. You'll be back to selling daisies on the street corner by noon. Ino felt the trap close around her. She looked at the money, then at Kakashi's masked face. She felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred for the system, for Kakashi, and most of all, for Naruto Uzumaki, the man who was dragging her into his abyss. She snatched the envelope off the desk, tucking it into her vest. Fine, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. I'll go. I'll see your god. But don't blame me if I end up being the one who finally breaks his neck instead of fixing his mind. Kakashi smiled, a true, weary smile. I'm counting on it, Ino. Use that fire. He's waiting for you. As Kakashi walked out, Ino stared at the door. She felt like she had just signed a contract with the devil. She didn't want to save Naruto. She wanted to hurt someone. And perhaps, she realized with a dark shiver, Naruto was the only person left in the world who could handle the weight of her malice. Ino Yamanaka didn't just pack a bag. She packed a grudge. The suitcase she dragged behind her was filled with clinical supplies, silk nightgowns, and a heavy dose of resentment. Following the map Kakashi had provided, she found herself ascending toward the Uzumaki spire. As she walked through the private district surrounding the penthouse, she couldn't help but feel a spike of irritation. This sector was pristine. The streets were paved with polished cobblestones, and the air smelled of mountain pine and expensive ozone, far removed from the crowded, sweat-soaked markets of central Konoha. "The hero's cage is certainly lined with gold," she muttered, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She reached the massive, reinforced oak doors of the penthouse. She didn't knock politely. She hammered against the wood with the side of her fist. Thud, thud, thud. Silence. "Naruto, open this door. Official village business," she shouted. No answer. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Ino's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. The audacity of this man, to keep her waiting after she had been forced into this nightmare. She began to kick the base of the door, her fury boiling over. "Open the door, you arrogant brat, or I'll blow the hinges off myself." Finally, the lock clicked. The heavy door swung inward with a slow, ghostly creak. Ino had her insults ready. She had a lecture prepared about respect and punctuality. But as the figure in the doorway came into focus, the words died in her throat. The Naruto Uzumaki she remembered was a tan, boisterous boy with spiky hair and a reckless grin. The man standing before her was a stranger. His hair had grown long, falling in jagged, pale blonde curtains around a face that had lost every trace of the sun. His skin, once bronzed by training fields, was now a haunting, porcelain white, translucent and smooth, as if he had been carved from marble and kept in a cellar. He was taller, leaner, and wrapped in a black silk robe that flowed around him like shadows. His blue eyes weren't the sky. They were the deep, freezing bottom of an ocean. "Finally," she breathed, her voice shaking slightly from the sheer shock of his transformation. "You took your time." Naruto didn't move. He leaned against the doorframe, looking down at her with a flat, uninterested gaze. "What do you want, Yamanaka? I don't need flowers, and I certainly don't need a visitor." "Move," Ino snapped. Before he could utter another word, she stepped forward and shoved him, hard. To her surprise, he stumbled back easily. Without his chakra to anchor his weight, he was as light as a leaf in a storm. Ino marched into the penthouse, her eyes darting around the interior. It was a palace of glass and cold stone, filled with expensive furniture that looked like it had never been sat upon. She dropped her heavy suitcase right in the center of the foyer, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "How dare you?" Naruto's voice rasped. He straightened his robe, his face contorting into a snarl that made the whisker marks on his pale cheeks sharpen. "How dare you burst into my home like a common thief, you pathetic shallow brat? Get out before I—" Ino turned on her heel, her movement a blur of blonde hair and violet fury. Before he could finish his insult, she lunged. Her fingers locked onto the high collar of his silk robe, bunching the fabric in her fist as she slammed him back against the nearest wall. "Listen to me, you broken, pale freak," she hissed, her face inches from his. Her breath smelled of mint and anger. "If you call me a brat or a pathetic anything ever again, I won't just report you. I will end you. I'm not the little girl from the academy, and I'm certainly not in the mood for your tortured hero act. Do you understand me?" Naruto didn't flinch. He looked down at her hand on his throat, then back at her eyes. A slow, hauntingly calm smile spread across his lips, a look of pure, cold mockery. He tried to swat her hand away, but his grip was weak, his muscles lacking the supernatural tension they once possessed. "Touchy, touchy," he whispered, his voice vibrating against her knuckles. "If I still had my chakra, if I still had the fox, you'd be a smear on that marble floor right now, Ino-chan. You're only brave because I'm a ghost." Ino felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't let go. She forced herself to breathe, to find the clinical distance she had been trained for, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She released his collar with a forceful shove, smoothing out her own vest. "But you don't have it," she reminded him cruelly. "You're just a man, and I'm the only thing standing between you and a padded cell in the intelligence division." She picked up her bag and began walking toward the master hallway, her voice echoing back to him. "Get used to the sight of me, Naruto. From this second forward, I live here. I am your shadow. I am your doctor. And by the time I'm done with you, you'll either be sane or you'll be begging me to kill you. Welcome to therapy." The air in the penthouse was thick, charged with a tension that felt like an oncoming storm. Ino stood in the center of the vast living area, her hands on her hips, her eyes tracking Naruto as he retreated into the shadows of a corner. He was a statue of silence, his pale face unreadable, his breathing shallow. "Why are you so quiet suddenly?" Ino asked, her voice echoing off the marble. The great Naruto Uzumaki, silenced by a girl with a suitcase? It's pathetic. The word pathetic was the spark that hit the powder keg. Naruto exploded. He didn't scream. He roared a raw, guttural sound that had no chakra behind it, but was fueled by 4 years of compressed agony. "A psychiatrist? What the hell is that supposed to mean? You think I'm crazy? You think I need a doctor to sit and tell me how to breathe? To tell me how to feel about a world that sucked me dry and spat me out?" Ino didn't flinch. Instead, a slow, mocking smile spread across her lips, a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. She reached in her vest and pulled out the heavy envelope of Ryo Kakashi had given her, fanning it out like a deck of cards. "Honestly, Naruto, I don't care what you need," she said, her voice dripping with a brutal honesty. "The Hokage offered me more money than I've seen in 3 years to deal with you. It's a fortune. Between the village's hypocrisy and my own recent disappointments, I realized I'd rather be rich and miserable here with you than poor and sane out there. I couldn't refuse the paycheck. You're just a job, Naruto. A very, very lucrative job." Naruto's face went white with a different kind of rage, a cold, murderous hate. "Get out," he hissed, his voice trembling. "Take your blood money and get out of my sight. I don't need a babysitter. I don't need a healer. I want to rot in peace." Ino completely ignored him. She turned her back on his fury and began to wander through the penthouse, her heels clicking a rhythmic taunt. My, so many rooms. All this space for one broken ghost. I think I'll take the south wing. Better sunlight for my skin." She began to walk toward a hallway lined with mahogany doors. Naruto snapped. He grabbed a heavy crystal vase from a side table and hurled it at her head. Ino didn't even turn around. She sensed the displacement of air, leaned her head a fraction to the left, and let the crystal shatter against the wall beside her. "Leave this house," Naruto screamed, grabbing a chair, a book, a lamp, anything within reach, and throwing them with a desperate, frantic strength. Ino moved with the grace of a dancer, parrying the flying objects with the back of her hand or simply stepping out of their trajectory. Her calm was the ultimate insult. She waited until he had exhausted himself, until he stood panting, his long blonde hair matted against his forehead, his chest heaving with the effort of a body that no longer had supernatural endurance. In a flash of movement, a blur of purple and blonde, Ino closed the distance. She didn't use a jutsu. She used raw, trained martial arts. She swept his legs out from under him before he could blink. Naruto hit the floor with a heavy thud, the air leaving his lungs in a sharp gasp. Before he could recover, Ino was on top of him, pinning his shoulders to the cold marble with her knees. She reached down, grabbing a handful of his long, silken blonde hair and yanking his head back with brutal force. "Listen to me, you little godling," she whispered, her voice low and terrifyingly sharp. "I'm staying here. I will sleep in your beds, I will eat your food, and I will watch you crumble until there's nothing left to fix. Your rage doesn't scare me. Your tantrums don't move me. I'm the only person in this world cruel enough to tell you the truth. You are a prisoner, and I am your warden." Naruto looked up at her, his neck strained, a jagged, manic laugh bubbling up in his throat despite the pain. "You're so proud of yourself, aren't you, Ino?" he spat, his voice raspy. "You only caught me because I'm weak. Because I'm empty. If I had a single drop of chakra, just one, you'd be ash right now. You're all the same. Kakashi, the council, you all wait until a lion loses its teeth before you start poking it with sticks. You're vultures, picking at a carcass." The bitterness in his voice was like acid, a testament to the hatred he felt for the friends who now treated him like a patient. Ino's expression didn't soften. She leaned down further, pressing her palm firmly over his mouth, cutting off his words. She looked into his eyes with a cold, piercing intensity that seemed to peel back the layers of his soul. "Shut up," she commanded, her voice a flat line. "I don't want to hear your what-ifs. I don't want to hear how powerful you used to be. Right now, in this room, you're nothing but a man who can't even get off the floor. Your complaining is boring. It's pathetic. It's ordinary." She let go of his hair, but kept her hand over his mouth for a moment longer, watching the fire of hatred burn in his blue eyes. "Now," she said, standing up and smoothing her skirt as if she hadn't just assaulted a national hero. "I'm going to unpack. If you throw another vase, I'll start breaking fingers. Do we have an understanding, hero?" Naruto lay on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, the silence of the penthouse returning like a heavy fog. He didn't answer, but his fingers curled into the marble, his mind already spinning into a new, darker form of insanity. The sun was beginning to set over the hidden leaf, casting long, bloody shadows across the stone faces of the Hokage. High atop the administrative building, on a secluded balcony that smelled of cold wind and old scrolls, Kakashi Hitaki stood with his hands tucked into his sleeves. He wasn't alone. A flicker of movement, a displacement of air, and Sasuke Uchiha appeared beside him. He didn't look at the Hokage. His gaze was fixed on the distant, gleaming spire where Naruto was entombed in his own luxury. Sasuke looked travel-worn, his dark cloak stained with the dust of distant lands, his lone visible eye as sharp and unforgiving as a winter frost. "You sent her," Sasuke said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. It wasn't a question. Kakashi didn't turn. "I did. 2 hours ago. She's likely moved in by now." Sasuke's jaw tightened. He finally turned his head, his Rinnegan and Sharingan hidden beneath his dark fringe, but the intensity of his stare was palpable. "Ino Yamanaka? You sent that girl to handle a man who has lost his mind and his godhead? Are you senile, Kakashi, or just desperate?" "She's not that girl anymore, Sasuke," Kakashi replied calmly, though there was a weary edge to his tone. "She's the head of the sensory division and the most capable psychiatrist we have left. She understands the architecture of the human mind better than anyone since her father." Sasuke let out a sharp, derisive huff. "She's a shallow socialite who spent her time worrying about flower arrangements and her own reflection. She was obsessed with me for a decade based on nothing but the way I looked. She's loud, she's emotional, and she's fragile. Naruto is a black hole right now. He'll swallow her whole and laugh while he does it." "Is that what you think?" Kakashi finally turned, his one visible "I'm meeting Sasuke's" dark gaze. "You haven't seen her lately. Sai broke her, Sasuke. Not in the way a ninja breaks a bone, but in the way a person breaks a promise. She's cold now. She's bitter. She's exactly what Naruto needs, someone who won't cry for him." Sasuke stepped closer, his aura flaring with a hint of dark chakra. "She's a civilian tier threat to his psyche. Naruto doesn't need therapy. He needs his purpose back. Putting a woman like Ino in that penthouse is like putting a canary in a cage with a dying tiger. Eventually, the tiger is going to get hungry, or the canary is going to stop singing out of pure terror." "I disagree," Kakashi said firmly. "I trust her. More importantly, I trust her spite. Ino is angry at the world, and Naruto is the world's greatest victim. They are two sides of the same shattered coin. Sakura couldn't do it. She loves him too much to be cruel. You couldn't do it. You just fight him. But Ino? She'll look him in the eye and tell him he's pathetic. and that's the only thing that will get through to him. Sasuke looked back at the spire, his expression unreadable. He's dangerous, Kakashi. Even without chakra, Naruto's mind is a weapon. If she fails, if she breaks, you haven't just lost a doctor. You've given a madman a partner. Maybe, Kakashi whispered, looking up at the first stars of the evening. But maybe a partner in madness is exactly what the hero of the leaf needs to survive the peace. Sasuke didn't reply. He simply vanished into a swirl of leaves, leaving Kakashi alone with the weight of his gamble. The night had fully claimed the sky outside the Uzumaki spire, turning the floor-to-ceiling glass walls into dark, reflective mirrors. Inside her new quarters, Ino Yamanaka was finally alone. The guest suite she had claimed was not a room, it was a statement. The ceilings were recessed with hidden LED strips that cast a soft, amber glow over a king-sized bed draped in charcoal silk. The floors were heated white oak, and the air was filtered to a crisp, mountain-fresh purity. Ino stood in the center of the room, her heavy suitcase lying open like a wound on the pristine rug. She took a slow, deep breath, letting the scent of sandalwood and expensive wax settle in her lungs. "My entire apartment could fit into this walk-in closet," she whispered, her voice bouncing off the minimalist walls. "The bastard is living like a decadent emperor, while the rest of us are haggling over the price of medicinal herbs in the market." She walked over to a vanity table made of polished obsidian. She sat down on the velvet cushion stool and looked at herself in the mirror. The lighting was perfect, designed to make anyone look like a god. Even with the exhaustion of the day and the lingering tremor of her rage toward Naruto, she looked radiant. Ino reached up and pulled the silk tie from her hair, letting the long, platinum blonde tresses cascade down her back like a waterfall of pale gold. She picked up a silver-backed brush and began to stroke it through her hair with rhythmic, hypnotic precision. Brush, pull, breathe. 60,000 Rio a week, she murmured to her reflection, a sharp, greedy glint appearing in her violet eyes. Plus the hazard pay Kakashi tucked into that envelope. In 3 months, I won't just be the head of the sensory division. I'll be the wealthiest woman in the Konoha nobility. I could buy a villa in the land of frost. I could buy a boat. I could buy everything. She leaned closer to the mirror, examining the sharp line of her jaw and the coldness in her gaze. The betrayal by Sai felt a little further away in this room. The luxury was a numbing agent, a high-end anesthetic for a bruised ego. "Let him scream," she said, a small, dangerous smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Let him throw his vases and talk about his lost glory. For this kind of money, I'll listen to him recite the history of the shinobi world backwards. I'll be his warden, his doctor, his nightmare. Whatever it takes to keep this penthouse and the lifestyle it provides." She ran her fingers through her hair one last time, admiring the way the light caught the strands. She looked like a queen preparing for a war. In a way, she was. "I'm going to be so incredibly rich," she breathed, the word a silent vow to the empty room. "And if I have to break the hero of the leaf into 1,000 pieces to get my payday, then that's just the cost of doing business." She stood up, her silk robe billowing around her ankles, and walked toward the window. Below her, the village of Konoha looked like a toy set, small and insignificant. For the first time in weeks, the weight of her betrayal didn't feel like a burden. It felt like fuel. The sun was beginning to set over the hidden leaf, casting long, bloody shadows across the stone faces of the Hokage. High atop the administrative building, on a secluded balcony that smelled of cold wind and old scrolls, Kakashi Hitaki stood with his hands tucked into his sleeves. He wasn't alone. A flicker of movement, a displacement of air, and Sasuke Uchiha appeared beside him. He didn't look at the Hokage. His gaze was fixed on the distant, gleaming spire where Naruto was entombed in his own luxury. Sasuke looked travel-worn, his dark cloak stained with the dust of distant lands, his lone visible eye as sharp and unforgiving as a winter frost. "You sent her," Sasuke said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. It wasn't a question. Kakashi didn't turn. I did. 2 hours ago. She's likely moved in by now. Sasuke's jaw tightened. He finally turned his head, his Rinnegan and Sharingan hidden beneath his dark fringe, but the intensity of his stare was palpable. Yamanaka? You sent that girl to handle a man who has lost his mind and is got it? Are you senile, Kakashi, or just desperate? She's not that girl anymore, Sasuke. Kakashi replied calmly, though there was a weary edge to his tone. She's the head of the sensory division and the most capable psychiatrist we have left. She understands the architecture of the human mind better than anyone since her father. Sasuke let out a sharp, derisive huff. She's a shallow socialite who spends her time worrying about flower arrangements and her own reflection. She was obsessed with me for a decade based on nothing but the way I looked. She's loud, she's emotional, and she's fragile. Naruto is a black hole right now. He'll swallow her whole and laugh while he does it. Is that what you think? Kakashi finally turned, his one visible "I'm meeting Sasuke's" dark gaze. You haven't seen her lately. Sai broke her, Sasuke. Not in the way a ninja breaks a bone, but in the way a person breaks a promise. She's cold now. She's bitter. She's exactly what Naruto needs. Someone who won't cry for him. Sasuke stepped closer, his aura flaring with a hint of dark chakra. She's a civilian tier threat to his psyche. Naruto doesn't need therapy. He needs his purpose back. Putting a woman like Ino in that penthouse is like putting a canary in a cage with a dying tiger. Eventually, the tiger is going to get hungry, or the canary is going to stop singing out of pure terror. I disagree, Kakashi said firmly. I trust her. More importantly, I trust her spite. Ino is angry at the world, and Naruto is the world's greatest victim. They are two sides of the same shattered coin. Sakura couldn't do it. She loves him too much to be cruel. You couldn't do it. You just fight him. But Ino? She'll look him in the eye and tell him he's pathetic. And that's the only thing that will get through to him. Sasuke looked back at the spire, his expression unreadable. He's dangerous, Kakashi. Even without chakra, Naruto's mind is a weapon. If she fails, if she breaks, you haven't just lost a doctor. You've given a madman a partner. Maybe, Kakashi whispered, looking up at the first stars of the evening. But maybe a partner in madness is exactly what the hero of the leaf needs to survive the peace. Sasuke didn't reply. He simply vanished into a swirl of leaves, leaving Kakashi alone with the weight of his gamble. The night had fully claimed the sky outside the Uzumaki spire, turning the floor-to-ceiling glass walls into dark, reflective mirrors. Inside her new quarters, Ino Yamanaka was finally alone. The guest suite she had claimed was not a room, it was a statement. The ceilings were recessed with hidden LED strips that cast a soft, amber glow over a king-sized bed draped in charcoal silk. The floors were heated white oak, and the air was filtered to a crisp, mountain-fresh purity. Ino stood in the center of the room, her heavy suitcase lying open like a wound on the pristine rug. She took a slow, deep breath, letting the scent of sandalwood and expensive wax settle in her lungs. My entire apartment could fit into this walk-in closet, she whispered, her voice bouncing off the minimalist walls. The bastard is living like a decadent emperor, while the rest of us are haggling over the price of medicinal herbs in the market. She walked over to a vanity table made of polished obsidian. She sat down on the velvet cushion stool and looked at herself in the mirror. The lighting was perfect, designed to make anyone look like a god. Even with the exhaustion of the day and the lingering tremor of her rage toward Naruto, she looked radiant. Ino reached up and pulled the silk tie from her hair, letting the long, platinum blonde tresses cascade down her back like a waterfall of pale gold. She picked up a silver-backed brush and began to stroke it through her hair with rhythmic, hypnotic precision. Brush, pull, breathe. 60,000 Rio a week, she murmured to her reflection, a sharp, greedy glint appearing in her violet eyes. Plus the hazard pay Kakashi tucked into that envelope. In 3 months, I won't just be the head of the sensory division. I'll be the wealthiest woman in the Konoha nobility. I could buy a villa in the land of frost. I could buy a boat. I could buy everything. She leaned closer to the mirror, examining the sharp line of her jaw and the coldness in her gaze. The betrayal by Sai felt a little further away in this room. The luxury was a numbing agent, a high-end anesthetic for a bruised ego. Let him scream, she said, a small, dangerous smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Let him throw his vases and talk about his lost glory. For this kind of money, I'll listen to him recite the history of the shinobi world backwards. I'll be his warden, his doctor, his nightmare. Whatever it takes to keep this penthouse and the lifestyle it provides. She ran her fingers through her hair one last time, admiring the way the light caught the strands. She looked like a queen preparing for a war. In a way, she was. I'm going to be so incredibly rich, she breathed, the word a silent vow to the empty room. And if I have to break the hero of the leaf into 1,000 pieces to get my payday, then that's just the cost of doing business. She stood up, her silk robe billowing around her ankles, and walked toward the window. Below her, the village of Konoha looked like a toy set, small and insignificant. For the first time in weeks, the weight of her betrayal didn't feel like a burden. It felt like fuel. Noakes, she gasped, wiping a tear from her eye. Naruto, you're writing jokes? She read one aloud, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Why did the shinobi cross the road? Because the village elders told him it was his will of fire to get hit by a carriage. She laughed again, louder this time. This is what you do all day? You sit in the dark and write dark, cynical comedy? You've gone from the savior of the world to a failed stand-up comedian. It's even more pathetic than I imagined. Naruto stood trembling, his fists clenched at his sides, his eyes burning with a mix of humiliation and pure, unadulterated hatred. It's the only truth left in this village, Ino. Everything is a joke. My life, your career, this piece, it's all one big, hilarious punchline. Well, consider this book confiscated for medical review, Ino said, her laughter subsiding into a wicked grin. Naruto lunged at her again, his hands reaching for the leather cover. Give it to me, now. Ino didn't move away this time. Instead, she took the book and slid it down the front of her silk robe, tucking it firmly against her chest, nestled between her skin and the fabric. She stood tall, her chin tilted up, a look of ultimate defiance on her beautiful face. You want it? She challenged, her voice dropping to a low, sultry taunt. If you're man enough to handle me, come and take it. Reach in and grab it, Naruto. Or are you too broken to even try? Naruto froze. He stared at her, his gaze locked on where the book was hidden. He was trapped between a mountain of rage and the sudden, suffocating proximity of a woman who was clearly as insane as he was. The air between them crackled with a new, dangerous energy, not of heroes and villains, but of two monsters recognizing each other in the dark. He didn't move. He simply stared at her, his breath hitching in his chest. That's what I thought, Ino whispered, her smile turning razor-sharp. Sit back down, hero. Class is in session. The mid-morning sun had climbed higher, turning the penthouse into a greenhouse of shimmering heat and stagnant tension. Ino had moved to the dining area, a long slab of polished obsidian that looked more like an altar than a table. On it, she had spread a lavish spread of imported fruits, smoked salmon, and artisanal bread. She sat gracefully, her emerald robe parted slightly at the knee, picking at a slice of melon with a silver fork. Breakfast is served, Naruto, she called out, her voice echoing with a forced, sugary sweetness. Or do ghosts not require sustenance? I'd hate for you to waste away. You're already looking a bit skeletal. Naruto remained in his corner, his back against the cold marble wall. He didn't even look at the food. His long, pale fingers were curled into the fabric of his robe, his knuckles white. I'm not hungry, he rasped. Eat your expensive scraps and leave me be. Ino let out a sharp, mocking titter. She stood up, walking toward him with a piece of toast held between two fingers. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes raking over his frame with clinical cruelty. Without his constant cloak of chakra, his body had leaned out into a sharp, jagged anatomy of bone and sinew. "You really are pathetic to look at now," she mused, her voice dropping to a whisper. The great hero, reduced to a collection of ribs and pale skin. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you were trying to disappear entirely. Is it the plan? To starve yourself into a shadow, so the village finally stops seeing you?" Naruto's jaw tightened so hard a muscle pulsed in his cheek. He turned his face away, staring into the void of the hallway. "Get away from me, Ino." She sighed a dramatic, airy sound. "Fine. More for me. I have a figure to maintain, after all." She retreated to the table, the sound of her chewing the only noise in the oppressive silence. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he finally stood up, his movements stiff and ghostly, and retreated into the darkness of his bedroom without a backward glance. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving Ino alone with the remains of her feast. She let out a long, heavy breath, her shoulders sagging just a fraction. The doctor mask slipped for a second, revealing the exhaustion underneath. She reached into the bodice of her robe, her fingers brushing against the cool leather of the book she had snatched earlier. She pulled it out, the warmth of her own body still clinging to the cover. "Let's see what else you're hiding in here, comedian," she muttered. She flipped past the first few pages of cynical puns and political satire. Her thumb caught on a page near the middle, where the ink seemed darker, the handwriting more frantic and jagged. As she read, the smirk vanished from her face. Her violet eyes widened, and her grip on the silver fork tightened until her knuckles turned white. The jokes had changed. They weren't about the village anymore. They were about the anatomy of an ending. What is the difference between a hero and a corpse? About 3 seconds of breathing. One gets a statue, the other gets peace. I'm tired of being the one with the statue. Ino felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She flipped the page. There were no more punchlines, just a single, repeating sentence written over and over again in the margins, so small she almost missed it. "The fox is gone. The sun is gone. Why am I still here? Why won't the heart stop when the soul already has?" And then at the very bottom of the page, a final, chilling entry. March 24th. The joke is almost over. I've picked a spot. The view from a balcony is best at midnight. One step for a man, one giant leap for a tragedy. Ino dropped the fork. It hit the obsidian table with a loud, metallic clatter that felt like a scream in the quiet room. She looked toward Naruto's closed door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had come here for the money, for the spite, and for the revenge against a world that had betrayed her. But looking at the ink-stained evidence of his descent, she realized she wasn't just guarding a patient. She was staring into a mirror. He wasn't just insane, he was finished. She tucked the book back in her robe, her hand trembling slightly. The beautiful insanity she had joked about was no longer a game. It was a race against a clock she hadn't realized was ticking. The air in the penthouse was thick with the scent of expensive soap and the chilling silence of a tomb. Ino didn't move from the shadows of the hallway. She stood pressed against the cold marble, her breath held, her violet eyes narrowed as she watched the door to the master bathroom. It was slightly ajar. A sliver of steam escaped, carrying the scent of cedar and rain. Through the gap, she saw him. Naruto was standing before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, his back to the door. He began to shrug the black silk robe from his shoulders. It slid down his arms like spilled ink, pooling around his heels on the white tile. Ino's heart skipped a beat, a sensation she couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't the shallow lust she had once felt for Sasuke or the weary comfort she had known with Sai. It was something primal, a magnetic pull toward a beautiful, broken thing. Without the robe, Naruto's body was a map of the Fourth War. His skin was so pale, it was almost translucent, stretched tight over a frame that was all sharp angles and hard shadows. The jagged scar where the seal had been sat like a dark sun at the center of his stomach, surrounded by the silver lines of old wounds. His spine was a delicate, dangerous ladder of bone. He looked like a fallen angel who had been stripped of his wings and left to starve in a palace. Suddenly, Naruto's head tilted. He didn't turn around, but his reflection in the steamed-over mirror caught her eye. Those flat, oceanic blue eyes locked onto hers through the crack in the door. "Enjoying the view, Doctor," he rasped, his voice echoing off the tiles. Ino didn't flinch. She pushed the door open further, leaning against the frame with a practiced, arrogant grace. "I've seen better," she lied, her voice steady despite the strange thrumming in her veins. "I'm just performing a physical assessment. You're losing muscle mass, Naruto. If you get any thinner, a strong breeze from the balcony might finish the job for you." Naruto turned slowly, completely indifferent to his nakedness. He looked at her with a chilling lack of shame, his long blonde hair damp and clinging to his neck. "Why are you still watching me?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration. "I told you to go. I told you this house is mine. Why are you lurking in my shadows like a starving dog?" Ino let out a sharp, mocking titter, though her eyes remained fixed on the hollow of his throat. "I'm not lurking. I'm observing. I'm watching your failure, Naruto. I'm watching the hero of the leaf struggle to even stand straight without a god inside him to hold his spine up. It's fascinating, really, like watching a star go cold." Naruto's face twisted into a snarl, the whisker marks on his cheeks darkening with a sudden rush of blood. He stepped toward her, his presence cold and suffocating even without chakra. "My failure is the only thing this village has left to celebrate. Go tell Kakashi I'm still breathing. Go collect your blood money and leave me to my rot." He brushed past her, his cold, damp skin nearly touching her arm, a ghost of a contact that made the hair on her neck stand up. He marched into his bedroom, the door slamming shut with a finality that shook the walls. Ino stood alone in the hallway, the steam from the bathroom curling around her ankles. She leaned her head back against the wall and exhaled a long, shaky breath. She shook her head slowly, a dark, twisted smile playing on her lips. "You're not a star going cold, Naruto," she whispered to the empty air. "You're a bomb waiting for a reason to go off. And I think I'm the only one crazy enough to want to be there for the explosion." The clock in the main hall chimed midnight, a cold, metallic sound that signaled the punchline to Naruto's final joke. Ino didn't rush. She moved through the darkened penthouse like a wraith, her emerald robe billowing behind her. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need them. She followed the trail of freezing air leading toward the expansive balcony that overhung the jagged cliffs of Konoha. There he was. Naruto stood on the very edge of the marble railing, his toes hanging over the abyss. The wind whipped his long, pale hair around his face like frayed silk. He looked fragile, a white splinter against the obsidian sky. He didn't look back when she stepped onto the terrace. "The view is better from up here, isn't it?" Naruto rasped, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. The village looked so small, like a collection of ants waiting to be crushed. "It's funny. I saved them all, and now, from here, they don't even look real." Ino didn't scream. She didn't beg him to come down. Instead, she leaned against the glass doorframe, crossing her arms and letting out a bored, rhythmic yawn. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice dripping with a calculated, poisonous apathy. "Because it's freezing out here, and I'd really like to go back to my silk sheets. If you're gonna jump, Naruto, just do it. Stop lingering like a dramatic amateur. It's pathetic." Naruto flinched, his shoulders tensing. He turned his head slightly, his blue eyes wide and bloodshot, reflecting the distant lights of the city. "You don't care? You're my doctor. You're supposed to stop me." Ino let out a sharp, jagged laugh that cut through the wind. "Stop you? Why? To save a man who's already a corpse? To preserve a hero who spends his days writing bad jokes in a leather book? No, Naruto. I'm not here to save you. I'm here to watch the end of a very long, very boring story." She walked closer, her heels clicking on the stone, stopping just feet away from him. Her eyes traveled up and down his trembling frame with pure, unadulterated scorn. "Look at you," she hissed, her voice a low, vibrating insult. "The great Uzumaki, the child of prophecy. You're so weak now that you can't even handle the weight of your own existence. You're not jumping because you're brave or because you're broken. You're jumping because you're a coward who can't stand being ordinary. You hate that you're just a man. You'd rather be a splatter on the pavement than a human being without a god in his gut." Naruto's face contorted. The Joker mask slipped, revealing a raw, screaming agony. "You know nothing. You haven't lost what I've lost. You still have your power, your vanity, your precious village. I lost my soul to a man who didn't even have a real name." Ino roared back, her own madness finally breaking through the professional veneer. "I spent my life healing people like you, only to be tossed aside like garbage when the war was over. We're the same, Naruto. We are the trash the Leaf threw away once the peace was signed. But I'm not jumping. I'm taking their money and laughing in their faces. You're just proving them right. You're proving that without the fox, you're nothing." Naruto let out a primal scream of rage, his foot slipping on the marble. He swayed over the edge, the wind tugging at his robe. "Do it then," Ino screamed, stepping right up to the railing. "Jump. Become the punchline. Give the council the easy way out. Let them put up a new statue and forget you ever breathed. Jump, you pathetic waste." The insult hit him harder than a physical blow. The rage in Naruto's eyes flickered his pride, the jagged, ugly remains of it, roaring back to life. He looked at her beautiful, contorted face, at the violet eyes that were just as shattered as his own. "I hate you," he whispered, his voice trembling with a new, dark energy. "Good," Ino sneered. "Hate is better than nothing. It's the only thing that's real in this house." In a blurred motion, Ino reached out. She didn't use a gentle hand. She grabbed him by the front of his robe and yanked him backward with a violent, bone-jarring force. Naruto tumbled off the railing, crashing onto the hard stone of the balcony. Before he could even gasp for air, Ino was on him. She pinned him down, her knees digging into his thin chest, her hands moving with a frantic, clinical aggression. She ripped open his robe, her fingers cold as ice as she pressed them against his frantic heart, then moved to check his pupils, her face inches from his. "Don't you dare die on my watch," she hissed, her breath hot against his pale skin. "You don't get the piece of the grave yet, Naruto. Not until I say so. I'm going to strip you down to the bone, and I'm going to see every scar, every crack, and every lie you've told yourself." Naruto lay there, pinned by the woman who claimed to hate him, his heart hammering against her palms. For the first time in 4 years, the silence in his head was gone, replaced by the roar of his own pulse and the terrifying, beautiful insanity of the woman looking down at him. "You're a monster," Naruto breathed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And you're my patient," Ino replied, her eyes burning with a dark, triumphant fire. "Welcome to the real therapy, Naruto. It's going to hurt like hell." The balcony was still freezing, but Ino didn't care. She had dragged Naruto from the edge of the abyss and slammed him onto the cold marble floor of the penthouse living room. He lay there, panting, his long blonde hair splayed out like a broken halo. "Stay down," Ino commanded. Her voice wasn't a healer's whisper, it was a general's roar. She straddled his chest, using her weight to keep him pinned. From the medical kit she had abandoned on the sofa, she snatched her stethoscope. With a rough, practiced motion, she ripped open his silk robe, exposing the pale, scarred map of his chest. The metal disc was ice cold as she pressed it firmly against his skin, right over his frantic heart. "Don't touch me," Naruto hissed, his voice a jagged rasp. He tried to buck his hips, but Ino leaned forward, her face inches from his, her violet eyes burning with a terrifying, manic clarity. "I said stay still, patient," she snapped. She closed her eyes for a second, listening to the thrumming beneath the ribs. Thump, 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 thump. The heart is magnificent, strong, stubborn. It doesn't care about your jokes or your void, Naruto. It wants to live, even if the man carrying it is a coward. She pulled the earpieces away, letting the stethoscope hang around her neck like a silver noose. She didn't get off him. Instead, she pulled out a small clinical notepad and a pen. "Since you're so fond of writing, let's do some verbal intake," she said, her smile turning razor sharp. "I'm going to ask you 10 questions. You're going to answer them. If you lie, I'll know. If you stay silent, I'll stay on your chest until morning. Understood?" Naruto glared at her, his blue eyes clouded with a mixture of loathing and a strange, flickering curiosity. He didn't nod, but he stopped struggling. He lay there, a captive audience to her madness. The evaluation. 1. Ino, when you look in a mirror, do you see the hero of the leaf? Or do you see the monster they used to call you? Naruto, I see a reflection that doesn't belong to anyone. I see glass that should have shattered years ago. 2. Ino, does the silence in this penthouse feel like peace? Or does it feel like the scream of everyone you couldn't save? Naruto, it feels like the truth. Noise is for people who still believe their voices matter. 3. Ino, why do you wear silk and live in marble if you hate the world that gave it to you? Is it comfort, or is it a gilded middle finger? Naruto, it's a cage. Might as well have soft bars while I wait for the lock to rust. 4. Ino, if I gave you a kunai right now and told you Sasuke was behind that door, would you try to kill him or ask him to finish what the war started? Naruto, I'd tell him he's late. He was always the one who knew how to end things properly. 5. Ino, do you miss the fox because you loved him, or because without his power, you realize you're just a boring, ordinary man? Naruto, I miss the noise. The world is too quiet when you're the only one left in your head. 6. Ino, what tastes better? The expensive wine in your cellar, or the copper tang of blood in your mouth during a real fight? Naruto, wine is just a slow way to rot. Blood at least reminded me I was warm. 7. Ino, does it bother you that the villagers eat and sleep because you broke your soul for them? Or does it bother you that they've already forgotten your name? Naruto, it bothers me that they think they're safe. They're just waiting for a different kind of ending. 8. Ino, if you could go back to the day you were born, would you still choose to save the world? Or would you let it burn so you could sleep in the ashes? Naruto, I'd let it burn. At least then the light would be honest. 9. Ino, when I touch you, do you feel disgusted, or are you just terrified that someone found a way into your tomb? Naruto, I feel like a vulture is trying to find meat on a skeleton. There's nothing left for you to take, Ino. 10. Ino, last one. If I left this door open right now and walked away with all my money, would you jump, or would you follow me just to make sure I'm as miserable as you are? Naruto, I'd follow you. I want to see the look on your face when you realize you can't fix a ghost. The silence returned to the room, heavy and suffocating. Ino stared down at him, her pen frozen over the paper. His answers were non-answers, vague, poetic, and utterly saturated with the Joker's cynicism he had adopted as a shield. But there was a vibration in his voice, a frequency of raw, unpolished pain that she recognized. She slowly tucked the notepad back into her robe. She shifted her weight, leaning down until her lips were brushing against the shell of his ear. You think you're so deep, don't you? With your dark metaphors and your honest ashes, she whispered, her voice a mix of a caress and a slap. She stood up abruptly, smoothing her hair and looking down at him with a look of pure, unadulterated condescension. She reached out and patted his pale cheek twice, a gesture so dismissive it made his blood boil. You're not a tragedy, Naruto. You're a failure, she said, her smile returning in full, wicked force. A failure of a hero, a failure of a martyr, and, currently, a failure of a suicide. You can't even die right. She turned on her heel and began walking toward her suite, her emerald robe swishing with triumph. Get off the floor and go to bed. We have another session at dawn. And Naruto, she looked back over her shoulder, her violet eyes glinting. Try to come up with some better jokes. This shattered glass bit is getting a little old. Naruto lay on the marble, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tight his nails drew blood from his palms. He hated her. He hated her more than the council, more than the war, more than the loss of his chakra. And for the first time in 4 years, that hatred felt like a reason to wake up tomorrow. Chapter 4. The Abyss Gazes Back. The penthouse was entombed in a silence, so thick it felt like physical pressure. Naruto had retreated to his room after the confrontation on the balcony, his door a silent barrier between two fractured souls. Ino sat in her own suite, the emerald silk of her robe shimmering in the dim light of a single candle. She wasn't sleeping. Her mind was a hive of clinical calculations and predatory curiosity. She looked at her hands, the hands of a Yamanaka, trained to weave through the tapestries of the human psyche like a needle through silk. You think you're empty, Naruto, she whispered to the shadows. But nature abhors a vacuum. If the fox is gone and the hero is dead, what is filling that space? She stood up, her movement fluid and ghost-like. She didn't need the money anymore. She needed the truth. She needed to know if the Joker she saw was a mask or the face itself. The infiltration. She crept into Naruto's room. He was sprawled across the massive bed, his long blonde hair fanned out over black silk pillows. He looked peaceful, his breathing shallow and rhythmic. To any other observer, he was a broken man at rest. To Ino, he was a fortress waiting to be breached. She knelt by the head of the bed, her fingers forming the familiar triangular seal of the mind-body transmission jutsu. She didn't have much chakra left. The village's peace had made her soft, and her own emotional turmoil had frayed her reserves. But she had enough. She focused on the space between his closed eyelids, targeting the core of his subconscious. Let's see what's behind the curtain, hero, she murmured. Shinken no Jutsu. The descent. The transition was instantaneous. Usually, entering a mind felt like diving into a pool of warm water, a sensory bleed of memories, colors, and distant echoes. Entering Naruto's mind was like falling into a well of liquid nitrogen. It was dark, absolute, suffocating darkness. There was no inner psyche landscape, no golden meadows of his childhood, no cage for the fox. There was only a vast, echoing void that smelled of ozone and old blood. Ino's mental projection shivered. She began to walk through the gloom, her footsteps echoing as if she were in a cathedral made of obsidian. Naruto, she called out, her mental voice vibrating. Where are you hiding? Suddenly, the floor beneath her feet turned into a mirror, dark, reflective glass. She looked down and saw her own reflection, but it wasn't her. It was a version of Ino with hollow eyes and a mouth sewn shut with black thread. She gasped, recoiling. And then, the center of the void began to pulse. The presence. A low, vibrating hum filled the space. It wasn't the roar of the nine tails. That had been a beast of fire and rage. This was something different. This was cold. This was calculated. This was an ancient, predatory intelligence that felt like it had been waiting for her since the dawn of time. From the darkness, a figure began to coalesce. It looked like Naruto, but he was taller, his skin as white as a bone in the moonlight, his eyes not blue, but a flat, abyssal violet that mirrored her own. He wasn't standing. He was floating in the center of the void, draped in rags of shadow. "You're early, Doctor," the Shadow Naruto spoke. The voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from the walls, the floor, and Ino's own skin. "I haven't finished the decorations for our party yet." Ino gritted her mental teeth, pushing back the fear. "You have no chakra, Naruto. This mindscape should be a crumbling ruin. How are you maintaining this? What is this thing inside you?" The Shadow Naruto laughed, a sound like glass grinding against glass. The fox was a parasite, he whispered, leaning closer until his cold, non-existent breath brushed her cheek. He took up so much room. He was so loud. But now that he's gone, I can finally hear myself think. Did you think I was empty, Ino? I'm not empty. I'm just refined. Suddenly, the violet eyes of the entity flared with a terrifying, malevolent light. The darkness around Ino began to solidify into jagged, black thorns. The expulsion. Ino tried to weave a counter-seal, to stabilize the mental plane, but she found herself paralyzed. Her technique, the pride of the Yamanaka clan, was being dismantled like a child's toy. The presence didn't just resist her, it found her disgustingly weak. Get out. The command was a physical shockwave. A massive, clawed hand made of pure, condensed nihilism surged from the floor, wrapping around Ino's neck. It didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a soul killer. It was a darkness so dense it defied the laws of the mind. Ino screamed as she felt her consciousness being crushed. This wasn't the Naruto who wanted to be Hokage. This wasn't even the broken man in the penthouse. This was the raw, unfiltered essence of a man who had looked at the end of the world and decided it wasn't dark enough. Boom! Ino's eyes flew open. She was thrown backward, her body slamming into the mahogany wardrobe of Naruto's room. She tumbled to the floor, gasping for air, her heart thundering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the bed. Naruto hadn't moved. He was still asleep, his expression calm and mask-like. But in the dim light, she could have sworn she saw a faint, violet shimmer around his pale skin, a residual hum of a power that shouldn't exist. Ino sat on the floor, her hands trembling violently. She was a master of the mind, yet she had been evicted from a powerless man's head like a common thief. He's not just broken, she whispered, her voice cracking with terror in a new, twisted form of awe. He's evolving. There's something in there, something darker than the fox ever was. She stayed on the floor for a long time, watching the hero sleep, realizing that the 60,000 Rio a week wasn't a salary. It was a funeral expense. The morning sun was unforgiving, cutting through the penthouse glass like a localized supernova. Ino emerged from the master bathroom enveloped in a cloud of expensive steam and the scent of white lilies. She had dressed to dominate. She wore a skin-tight, high-waisted pencil skirt in a deep plum color and a sleeveless silk blouse that left little to the imagination, showing off the flawless, sun-kissed skin of her shoulders. Her hair was pulled into a high, lethal ponytail, and her lips were painted a shade of red that looked like drying blood. She looked less like a doctor and more like a high-end assassin who had just inherited a kingdom. She walked into the living room, her heels clicking a rhythmic, arrogant beat. Naruto was already there, tucked into his usual corner of the velvet sofa. He didn't look at her. He didn't even flinch at the sound of her approach. He was hunched over a brand-new leather notebook, blacker and thicker than the last one, scribbling with a frantic, rhythmic intensity. "Is that volume 2 of the world's worst jokes?" Ino asked, leaning against the kitchen island, watching him with a predatory tilt of her head. Naruto didn't pause. Volume 1 was for the village. Volume 2 is a detailed anatomical study of why psychiatrists are the most redundant life forms on the planet. I'm currently on the chapter about their oversized egos. Ino let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She walked over, leaning over the back of the sofa so her shadow fell across his pages. "Listen to me, you ungrateful brat. I had a very long night, thanks to you, and I'm not in the mood for your brooding artist routine. Put the pen down." Naruto ignored her, his hand moving even faster. "I said put it down," Ino hissed. She reached over and snatched the pen from his fingers. Naruto finally looked up. His blue eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark circles that made his pale skin look even more ghostly. He looked at her with a flat, weary disgust. "What do you want, Yamanaka? Did the mirror in your room break? Do you need me to tell you you're pretty so you can function for another hour?" I want you to remember who's in charge here, Ino said, slamming her hand onto the sofa next to his head. I am your mistress in this house. Your warden. Your god. You are a patient, which is just a fancy word for a broken toy. Now start talking. Tell me your problems, you miserable animal. Tell me why you're hiding behind a notebook like a frightened academy student. Naruto let out a dry, hacking laugh. My problems? You want to hear my problems, you blonde parasite? My problem is that I'm trapped in a cage with a woman who has the depth of a puddle and the greed of a black market merchant. You aren't here for my problems. You're here for the paycheck. So what if I am? Ino countered, leaning in until her nose almost touched his. At least I have a purpose. At least I'm still alive enough to want things. You're just a lump of meat waiting for the flies to find you. You're a money-hungry bitch, Naruto spat, the insult landing with the weight of a physical blow. Ino didn't flinch. She smiled, a wide, terrifyingly beautiful grin that showed too many teeth. And you're a chakra-less, talentless, limp-hearted failure who can't even kill himself properly. See? We both have titles. Now let's get to work. She sat down on the coffee table directly in front of him, crossing her legs. I actually want to help you, Naruto. Believe it or not. Naruto leaned back, his lopsided, manic grin returning. Help me? You want to help yourself to my bank account. You're a money dog, Ino, a golden retriever with a taste for Rio. You don't care about my soul. You care about whether the floor stays marble and the wine stays vintage. If I were a poor genin in the slums, you wouldn't even spit in my direction. True, Ino conceded with a shrug, her violet eyes glinting with a dangerous spark. But you aren't a poor genin. You're a rich disaster. And since I'm the only one who can stand the smell of your despair, you're stuck with me. So talk. Why the jokes? Why the darkness? And what? She lowered her voice, her gaze piercing his, was that thing I felt in your head last night. Naruto's grin vanished. The air in the room suddenly turned 5 degrees colder. He leaned forward, his face inches from hers, and for a second, the Joker was gone, replaced by the ancient predatory thing she had seen in the void. If you ever go back into my head, Ino, he whispered, I won't just kick you out. I'll keep you there. And believe me, you wouldn't like the neighbors. He snatched his notebook back and stood up, walking toward the balcony without another word. Ino watched him go, her heart racing not with fear, but with an intoxicating rush of adrenaline. You're a liar, Naruto, she called out after him, a triumphant smirk on her lips. You love that I'm here. I'm the only person who doesn't look at you and see a hero. I see exactly what you are, a monster who's lonely. Naruto didn't look back, but the way his shoulders tensed told her everything she needed to know. The game wasn't just about money anymore. It was about who would break first. The morning had reached its peak, and Ino was finished with the shadows. She had spent the last hour meticulously preparing for their first social excursion, and she wasn't about to let Naruto's nihilistic brooding ruin her plans. She marched into his bedroom without knocking, kicking the door open with the heel of her designer pump. Get up, sunshine. The world is waiting to be offended by your presence, she announced, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. Naruto was tangled in his black silk sheets, looking like a corpse that had forgotten to rot. He didn't even open his eyes. Go away, Ino. The sun is too loud today. Go buy a diamond or something and leave me to my misery. Ino didn't listen. She walked straight to his massive walk-in closet, a room larger than most genin apartments, and began rifling through the racks of expensive, untouched designer clothing the village council had provided for their golden boy. You are not staying in this tomb today, she said, tossing a pair of slim-fit charcoal trousers and a crisp, high-collared white shirt onto his bed. We're going out. You need vitamin D, and I need to be seen with someone famous to keep my social standing intact. Naruto finally sat up, his long, pale hair falling over his face like a curtain. He looked at the clothes as if they were poisonous snakes. I'm not going out. I don't belong out there. The people look at me like I'm a broken vase they're afraid to touch. I'm staying here. Not an option, Ino countered, leaning against the bedpost and crossing her arms. As your lead psychiatrist, I am prescribing a social integration session. If you don't get dressed in the next 5 minutes, I'll dress you myself. And believe me, Naruto, I've seen everything you have to offer, so don't think modesty will save you. Naruto let out a low, vibrating growl. I said, no, you've a golden-haired leech. You can't force me. I'm a sovereign citizen of this penthouse. Get out. Ino didn't move. Instead, a slow, predatory smirk spread across her red lips. She reached into the pocket of her plum skirt and pulled out the small, leather-bound book, the Journal of Dark Jokes. She began to flip through the pages casually, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. You know, Naruto, some of these jokes are actually quite revealing, especially the ones about the village elders. And that one about the Hokage's hat? Pure treason. Really spicy stuff. Naruto froze. His eyes locked onto the book, his pupils narrowing. Give that back, Ino. That's private. Is it? Ino asked, her voice dropping to a mock-innocent whisper. Because I was thinking, if you don't come for a walk with me, I might just take this down to the Konoha Gazette. Imagine the headlines. The hero of the leaf thinks the piece is a punchline. Or, better yet, I could just read it aloud in the middle of the marketplace. I'm sure everyone would love to hear how their savior really feels about them. Naruto's face went from ghostly white to a dark, simmering red. He lunged for the book, but Ino stepped back with a dancer's grace, tucking the journal back into the safety of her bodice. Ah, she wagged a finger at him. If you touch me, I'll scream. And then I'll publish. Every single word. Your reputation will be in the dirt before lunch. Naruto sat on the edge of the bed, his chest heaving with a mix of humiliation and pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked at her perfect hair, her smug smile, and her absolute lack of shame. You really are a monster, he spat, the words dripping with venom. You're worse than any villain I ever fought. They at least had honor. You're just cruel. Ino let out a joyous, triumphant laugh that rang through the penthouse like a victory bell. I know. Isn't it refreshing? Now put on the trousers, hero. We have a public to disappoint. She turned on her heel and walked out, her laughter trailing behind her. 10 minutes later, Naruto emerged from the bedroom. He looked stunning and miserable. The charcoal trousers emphasized his lean, tall frame, and the white shirt stood out against his pale skin. He looked like a dark prince in mourning. Ino was waiting by the door, already holding her parasol. She looked him up and down, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. Look at you, she cooed, reaching out to straighten his collar. Almost human. If you promise not to bite anyone, I might even buy you a dango. Naruto slapped her hand away, his eyes burning. Just remember one thing, Ino. When the world finally sees the joke, I'm going to make sure you're the first one to laugh. I'm looking forward to it, she replied, opening the door and stepping out into the blinding light of the village, dragging the broken legend behind her. The descent from the Uzumaki spire felt like stepping into a furnace of judgment. The sun was high, bleaching the streets of Konoha in a brilliant, unforgiving white. Ino led the way, her heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic staccato against the cobblestones. She walked with her chin held high, her parasol twirling over her shoulder, a vision of high society grace. Behind her, trailing by a deliberate 5 paces, was the ghost. Naruto walked with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his charcoal trousers, his head bowed, his long blonde hair shielding his face like a veil. He moved with a sluggish, reluctant gait, a prisoner being marched to his own execution. You know, Naruto, Ino called out over her shoulder, her voice carrying a melodic, teasing edge that made the nearby shopkeepers turn their heads. If you keep walking behind me like that, people will think you're just stalking me for the view. I know I'm exceptionally beautiful today, but try to keep your eyes on the road, not my silhouette. It's ungentlemanly. Naruto let out a dry, raspy snort that sounded like sandpaper. Don't flatter yourself, Ino. I'm walking back here, so I don't have to smell your perfume. It's suffocating. Between your ego and that scent, I'm surprised the birds haven't started falling out of the sky. Ino's smile didn't falter, but her grip on the parasol tightened until her knuckles went white. She stopped abruptly, turning on her heel, so fast her plum skirt flared. Naruto, lost in his own brooding, nearly collided with her. In a flash of violent fury, she dropped the parasol and grabbed the front of his high-collared shirt, bunching the fabric in her fist. She yanked him down until their faces were inches apart. "Listen here, you ungrateful," she began, her voice a low, vibrating hiss. Around them, the marketplace went silent. A grandmother dropped her bag of tomatoes. Two chunin on patrol stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide. The hero of the leaf was being manhandled by the head of the sensory division in broad daylight. Ino felt the weight of 100 stares. She realized how it looked, the healer attacking the patient. A cold, nervous sweat pricked her skin. She forced a high-pitched, artificial laugh that rang through the square like a cracked bell. She let go of his collar and began to pat his shoulders with exaggerated, manic affection, smoothing out the wrinkle she had just made. "Oh, look at us," she chirped loudly, her eyes darting to the crowd. "Just a little therapeutic role play. Isn't he just the funniest? We're just joking, everyone. Move along. Nothing to see but a doctor and her very, very eccentric patient." She grabbed Naruto's arm with a grip that felt like a steel vise, leaning in to whisper into his ear, "If you humiliate me again, I will burn your joke book in the middle of the Hokage monument. Smile, damn you." Naruto's eyes gleamed with a dark, satisfied amusement. He had won this round. They continued their walk, passing through the central plaza. Naruto pulled his new notebook from his waistband, scribbling as he walked, his eyes darting toward the villagers with a predatory, observational coldness. He wasn't looking for friends. He was looking for flaws. He was cataloging the hypocrisy of their peace in real time. Suddenly, a small commotion erupted near a dango stall. A group of 3 academy students, no older than 8, came rushing toward them. They were clutching worn-out posters and wooden kunai, their eyes sparkling with the kind of hero worship Naruto had long since buried. "Lord Naruto! Lord Naruto!" the smallest boy cried out, holding up a tattered orange headband. "Can we have your autograph? Please, we want to be just like you." Naruto stopped. He looked down at the children, his face a mask of pale, freezing indifference. The Joker in him wanted to tell them the truth, to tell them that being a hero was a scam, that the village would use them until they were hollow and then throw them in a penthouse to rot. His lips began to curl into a cruel, jagged sneer. "Get away from," he started, his voice cold and sharp. Click. The sound of Ino opening her purse was like a gunshot. She pulled out the leather-bound joke book, holding it up just high enough for him to see. Her eyes were fixed on him, a silent, lethal threat. "Smile for the children, or I publish the treason." Naruto's jaw worked in silent rage. He looked at the book, then back at the hopeful, innocent faces of the children. A slow, terrifyingly artificial smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. Those remained abyssal and cold. He took the pen from the boy's trembling hand. "Of course," Naruto whispered, his voice dripping with a sarcasm the children were too young to hear. "I'd love to sign your little toys. Always happy to inspire the next generation of sacrifices." He signed the headband with a flourish, his handwriting jagged and sharp. He patted the boy's head, his touch light and ghostly. "Study hard," Naruto added, his lopsided grin widening as he looked over at Ino. "The village needs more people who follow orders without thinking." The children cheered, oblivious to the venom, and ran off. Ino tucked the joke book back into her purse, her expression shifting back to a smug, satisfied glow. "See," she whispered, sliding her arm through his and forcing him to walk beside her. "You're still a hero, Naruto, even if you have to be blackmailed into it." Naruto looked at her, his blue eyes reflecting the sun like shards of ice. You're playing with fire, Ino. One of these days, the children are going to stop cheering, and I'm going to stop smiling. And I'm going to make sure you're the first thing I burn. I've always liked the heat, she replied, leading him toward the tea house as the village watched their golden, broken savior walk by. The tea house was an oasis of traditional luxury, filled with the scent of roasted matcha and the hushed whispers of Konoha's elite. As Ino swept inside, dragging Naruto in her wake, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Every head turned. The hero of the leaf, dressed in sharp, dark elegance, looked like a fallen prince from a ghost story. Ino claimed a central table, wanting to be seen. She sat down with a practiced flick of her plum skirt, her violet eyes scanning the room. She noticed the way the younger women at the surrounding tables leaned in, their eyes wide, whispering behind silk fans about Naruto's new, hauntingly pale aesthetic. 2 premium matchas and a plate of seasonal mochi, Ino commanded as a young waitress approached. The waitress, a girl with soft brown eyes and a name tag that read Hannah, wasn't looking at Ino. She was staring at Naruto as if he were a miracle. She lingered by the table, her cheeks flushing a deep rose. "Lord Naruto," Hannah whispered, her voice trembling. It's an honor. We haven't seen you in years. You look different. Beautifully so." Naruto leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory lopsided grin spreading across his face. He didn't look at Ino. He focused entirely on the waitress. He leaned forward, his long, pale fingers tapping the edge of the table. "Hannah," he said, reading her tag with a voice like velvet over broken glass. "That's a lovely name. It suits you. You have eyes like the forest after a rain. Much more refreshing than the artificial lights of a penthouse." Ino's grip on her parasol tightened until the wood groaned. A strange, hot prickle of irritation, something she refused to call jealousy, flared in her chest. Hannah gasped, her eyes shimmering. "Oh, thank you, my lord. I get off my shift at 8. If you aren't too busy, perhaps we could walk by the river? I'd love to hear more of your poetry." "I'd like that, Hannah," Naruto replied, his voice dripping with a calculated, dark charm. He pulled his smartphone, a high-end device provided by the council, from his pocket and slid it across the table toward her. "Why don't you put your number in here? I find myself in need of a distraction from my current medical supervision." Hannah reached for the phone, her fingers trembling with excitement. Snap! Before Hannah's hand could touch the screen, Ino's hand shot out like a viper. She snatched the phone off the table, her eyes flashing with a violet fire that made the waitress recoil in terror. "The session is over, Hannah," Ino hissed, her voice a low, lethal vibration. "Go fetch the tea before I report this establishment for unprofessional conduct. Now, move." The waitress stammered an apology and fled toward the kitchen, her face pale. Ino's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. She leaned over the table, her breath coming in sharp, jagged gasps. "Beautiful? You told her she was beautiful? I have been living in your house, bathing in your bathroom, and wearing silk in your hallways for days. I am the head of the sensory division. I am arguably the most stunning woman in this entire nation. And not once, have you told me I'm beautiful. You call me a parasite. You call me a money dog, but you offer your hand to a girl who pours tea." Naruto's grin widened, becoming something jagged and cruel. "That's because she wants Naruto the man. You're just a money dog. Ino, a high-priced vulture waiting for me to die so you can inherit the furniture. Why would I compliment a warden? You aren't a woman to me. You're just a very expensive bill." The insult snapped the last thread of Ino's control. She didn't care that they were in a public tea house. She didn't care about the gasping socialites or the whispering villagers. She lunged across the table, her hands reaching out with the speed of a seasoned kunoichi. She grabbed Naruto by the throat, her fingers digging into the pale skin of his neck. She yanked him forward until their foreheads clashed, her violet eyes inches from his abyssal blue ones. "You arrogant, ungrateful freak," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and something far more volatile. I'm the only thing keeping you from the abyss. I am the only one who looks at your jokes and doesn't scream. You will respect me, or I will make sure the rest of your life is lived in a padded room without a single window to see your beautiful waitresses. Naruto didn't struggle. He looked at her through the haze of his own lack of oxygen. That haunting, manic smile still pinned to his lips. He liked the fire in her. He liked that he had finally made the healer bleed her true emotions. There she is, he wheezed, his voice a ghost of a sound. There's the beautiful insanity I was looking for. Keep choking me, Ino. It's the most honest thing you've done all day. Ino realized she was shaking. She realized she was staring at his lips, her heart drumming a frantic, dark rhythm against her ribs. She let go of his throat with a forceful shove, sitting back down and smoothing her hair with trembling hands as the tea house erupted into a chorus of shocked whispers. "Drink your tea," she commanded, her voice cold and hollow. "We're going home, and if you speak to another woman today, I'm taking your notebook and burning it in the fireplace." Naruto touched his neck, the red marks of her fingers standing out against his porcelain skin like a brand. He picked up his tea, his eyes never leaving hers. "Whatever you say, mistress," he whispered, and for the first time, the joke felt like a promise. The walk back from the tea house was a battlefield of silence. Ino marched ahead, her parasol gripped like a ceremonial sword, her heels striking the pavement with the force of small explosions. Behind her, Naruto walked with a strange, fluid grace, the red marks of her fingers still vivid against the porcelain white of his throat, a necklace of bruises that he wore with a twisted, prideful smirk. They were nearing the base of the Uzumaki spire when a flash of pink cut through the afternoon haze. "Naruto!" Sakura Haruno came sprinting toward them, her medical robes fluttering. She didn't slow down. She crashed into Naruto with the force of a landslide, her arms wrapping around his lean frame in a desperate, lung-crushing hug. For a moment, the Joker mask flickered. Naruto stiffened, then slowly his long, pale arms wound around Sakura's waist. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of antiseptic and cherry blossoms, the scent of a past he had tried to burn. "Sakura-chan," he murmured, his voice losing its jagged edge for a fleeting second. "You've grown softer, or maybe I've just grown colder." Ino stood 3 feet away, her parasol trembling in her hand. A hot, acidic surge of territorial rage flared in her gut. She watched the way Naruto's fingers dug into Sakura's red vest, the way Sakura squeezed him as if trying to fuse his broken soul back together. Sakura pulled back just an inch, her emerald eyes searching his pale, hollowed face. I heard the council assigned Ino to you. I was so worried, Naruto. I wanted to be the one to treat you, but Kakashi said I was too close, that I wouldn't be objective enough." Naruto's lopsided, manic grin returned, but this time it was directed at Sakura with a terrifying sweetness. He reached out, tucking a strand of pink hair behind her ear, his touch lingering far longer than necessary. "Ino is efficient," Naruto said, his eyes darting toward the blonde psychiatrist with a look of pure, calculated malice. "But she's a warden, Sakura, a money-hungry guard. I find myself wishing every hour that it was you in that penthouse instead of her. Your hands were always warmer. Her hands, they only know how to choke." Sakura's cheeks flushed a bright, vivid crimson. "Naruto, I didn't know you felt that way. I would have fought harder for the assignment." Ino stepped forward, the air around her vibrating with the force of a sensory ninja's repressed fury. She shoved herself between them, her shoulder checking Sakura aside with practiced, clinical coldness. "That's enough," Ino snapped, her voice like a whip. "The session is over. Naruto is under a strict recovery protocol, and excessive emotional stimuli are detrimental to his stability. He's exhausted, Sakura. He needs to return to the spire immediately." Naruto didn't move. He leaned back against a stone pillar, crossing his arms and looking at Ino with a look of mock innocence. Exhausted? Not all. In fact, I feel more energized than I have in years. Sakura-chan's company is therapeutic, much better than the bitter medicine you provide. I think I'll stay down here a while. Maybe we can go for a walk, Sakura? Just the two of us. No wardens allowed. Sakura looked at Ino, a small, defiant spark in her eyes. You heard him, Ino. He's the patient, right? If he feels up to it, shouldn't his comfort come first? Leave him with me for a few hours. I'll bring him back before sundown. Ino felt the blood roaring in her ears. She looked at Naruto, at the triumphant, dancing light in his blue eyes, and realized he was using Sakura as a scalpel to cut her. He was punishing her for the tea house. I am the head of the sensory division and his lead psychiatrist, Ino hissed, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. I don't care about comfort. I care about results. And my professional opinion is that he is currently experiencing a manic episode fueled by your presence. I decide who he sits with. I decide when he breathes. She reached out, grabbing Naruto's wrist with a grip that promised bruises. We are leaving, she commanded. She yanked him away from Sakura with a violent, possessive force. Naruto let himself be pulled, his laughter ringing out across the plaza, a sharp, melodic sound that chilled Sakura to the bone. See you soon, Sakura-chan, Naruto called out over his shoulder, his eyes locked on Ino's shaking back. Don't worry, my doctor is just a little possessive. She hates sharing her favorite toy. Ino didn't look back. She dragged him toward the spire, her heart hammering a frantic, jealous rhythm. Naruto followed her, his feet light, a look of pure, ecstatic joy on his face. He had finally found her weakness. He had finally found the crack in her marble exterior. The heavy mahogany door of the penthouse slammed shut with a sound like a guillotine blade hitting the block. The vacuum seal of the luxury apartment engaged, cutting off the sounds of the village, the wind, and the lingering echo of Sakura's voice. Silence rushed in, but it wasn't peaceful. It was a pressurized chamber of pure, unadulterated hatred. Ino didn't let go of Naruto's wrist. She spun around, using the momentum of her fury to heave him against the wall. The hero of the leaf hit the marble with a dull thud, his long blonde hair splaying out against the stone like a silk fan. Ino didn't step back. She pressed her entire body against his, pinning him there, her face inches from his. Her chest was heaving, the silk of her blouse straining with every jagged breath. You think you're so clever, don't you? She hissed, her voice vibrating with a frequency that could shatter glass. You think using that pink-haired saint to mock me is a game? You think I didn't see what you were doing? You were performing Naruto. You were a puppet putting on a show for the village. Naruto didn't struggle. He leaned his head back against the cold wall, his throat exposed, the red marks of her fingers from the tea house still glowing like embers against his pale skin. He looked down at her with a lopsided, manic grin that reached his abyssal eyes. And what a show it was, Ino, he whispered, his voice a ghost of taunt. Did you see her face? She actually cares. She doesn't have a price tag. She doesn't look at me and see a bank account. She sees a man. Something you wouldn't understand, even if I drew you a map. Shut up, Ino roared. She grabbed his face, her fingernails digging into his jawline. Don't you dare talk to me about care. You don't want her care, Naruto. You want her pity. You want her to cry for you, so you can feel like a god again. But me? I see you for the hollow, spiteful, broken thing you are. And it kills you, doesn't it? It kills you that I'm the only one who isn't fooled by your hero mask. Is that what this is, Ino? Naruto's laugh was dry, a rattling sound in his chest. Are you jealous? Does it burn your greedy little heart that I'd rather spend a minute with a saint than a lifetime with a vulture like you? You're a money dog, remember? Why do you care who I hug? Just count your Rio and go to bed. I am not jealous, Ino screamed. Her vision was blurring with tears of pure, molten rage. I am your doctor. I'm the one who dragged you off that balcony. I am the one who has to listen to your pathetic jokes. You belong to this mission. You belong to this contract. You don't get to run to her the moment things get difficult." She pounded her fist against his chest. Not a shinobi strike, but a raw, emotional blow. Naruto's eyes flared with a sudden, dark intensity. He grabbed her wrists, his grip surprisingly strong for a man without chakra, and twisted them until she was forced to look up at him. "You hate her because she's everything you're not," Naruto rasped, his face inches from hers. "She's soft. She's loyal. She's real. And you? You're a beautiful, empty shell made of spite and silk. You don't want to fix me, Ino. You want to own me. You want to be the one who controls the great Naruto Uzumaki because you have nothing else in your life that matters." "I hate you," Ino cried out, her voice breaking. "I hate your pale skin. I hate your long hair. I hate your stupid notebooks. I wish I had never taken this money. I wish I had let you jump." "Then why didn't you?" Naruto challenged, his voice dropping to a low, hypnotic growl. "Why are you still holding on to me? Why are you shaking, Ino? Is it rage? Or is it because for the first time in your shallow life, you found someone just as insane as you are?" Ino stopped screaming. She looked into those blue eyes that were no longer the sky, but the deep, freezing ocean. She saw her own reflection in them, a woman consumed by a darkness she didn't recognize. The air in the room felt electric, a spark gap between two high-voltage wires. The hatred between them had fermented into something toxic, something addictive. "I'm going to break you, Naruto," she whispered, her voice a promise of total destruction. "I'm going to peel back every layer of your mind until there's nothing left but the screaming. And I'm going to enjoy every second of it." "I'm counting on it," Naruto replied, his lopsided grin returning, wider and more terrifying than before. "Just don't be surprised when you find yourself screaming right along with me." He let go of her wrists, and Ino stepped back, her chest still heaving. She looked at him, the ghost of the man she was supposed to save, and realized the explosion hadn't ended. It was just beginning. Chapter 5: The Gilded Truce. The pale light of dawn filtered through the sheer silk curtains of Ino's bedroom, casting long, ethereal shadows across the charcoal-colored duvet. Ino Yamanaka sat cross-legged in the center of the bed, her eyes closed, her hands resting on her knees in a meditative posture she hadn't used since her days training under her father. "Breathe in, breathe out. Don't let the monster win." Her chest was still tight from the explosion the night before. The ghost of Naruto's hands on her wrists, the heat of his mocking breath against her skin, and the humiliating sting of his preference for Sakura, it all swirled in her mind like a toxic fog. "He's just a patient," she whispered to the empty, opulent room. Her voice was raspy, stripped of its usual melodic bite. "He's a broken, chakra-less shell. He's a paycheck. He is 60,000 Ryo a week and a ticket to a life where I never have to answer to anyone again." But her heart hammered a different rhythm. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the way he looked at her, as if he could see the rotting floorboards beneath her polished exterior. He had called her a money dog. He had called her empty. "I am not empty," she hissed, her eyes snapping open, flashing with a violet fire. She stood up and walked to the obsidian vanity, staring at her reflection. Her hair was a mess of platinum silk, her eyes slightly puffed from the adrenaline of their war. She looked at the red marks on her own neck. Faint, but there, where the tension of their confrontation had left its physical signature. She began to brush her hair, her movements slow and deliberate. "Strategy, Ino. Think like a Yamanaka. Rage isn't working," she reasoned with herself, watching her reflection's lips move. "He thrives on it. He eats my anger like it's the only nourishment he has left. He wants me to scream. He wants me to be the vulture because it justifies his own rot." She paused, the silver brush hovering near her ear. "If I want to break him, if I truly want to win this mission and claim my prize, I have to change the frequency. I have to be the one thing he doesn't expect. I have to be kind." The word felt like ash in her mouth. Kindness. To Naruto, the man who had mocked her soul and invited a waitress to a date in front of her. Not real kindness, she clarified to the mirror, a slow, predatory smirk spreading across her face. A weaponized warmth. I'll drown him in care until he doesn't know which way is up. I'll be the saint he thinks Sakura is, but with the edge he can't resist. If you want a doctor, I'll give him a savior. And once he lets his guard down, once he actually starts to need me. She leaned closer to the glass, her eyes narrowing. Then I'll own him, not just as a patient, but as a masterpiece. I'll rebuild him in my image, and he'll thank me for the privilege while I spend his village's gold. She took a deep breath, smoothing her features into a mask of serene, professional calm. She chose a softer outfit today, a flowing, cream-colored wrap dress that made her look approachable, ethereal, and devastatingly gentle. She softened her makeup, choosing rose tones instead of the blood red of the day before. He's a miserable, pathetic man, she told herself one last time as she reached for the door handle. And I am the woman who is going to conquer his misery with a smile. She stepped out into the hallway, her heels clicking softly, her heart masked by a shroud of calculated sweetness. The war hadn't ended. It had simply moved to a more dangerous, subtle front. The kitchen of the penthouse was bathed in a soft, deceptive glow as the morning sun hit the white marble counters. Ino moved with a fluid, performative grace, her cream-colored wrap dress swirling around her legs. She wasn't just cooking, she was staging a scene. The scent of toasted rice, grilled mackerel, and fresh miso soup filled the air. Aromas of home, of comfort, of the things a broken hero was supposed to crave. She plated the food with artistic precision, placing a single decorative leaf on the side of the tray. "Naruto," she called out, her voice a complete transformation from the screaming fury of the night before. It was melodic, feathered with a soft, apologetic lilt. "Breakfast is ready. Please come out." Naruto appeared in the doorway, his long blonde hair messy, his black robe hanging loosely off his thin shoulders. He leaned against the frame, his blue eyes narrowed as he watched her. He didn't move toward the table. He stood there like a predator watching a trap. "What is this, Ino?" he asked, his voice dry and rasping. "Did the Hokage double your salary overnight? Or did you finally realize that vinegar doesn't catch as many flies as honey?" Ino didn't let the insult pierce her mask. She turned toward him, a soft, sorrowful smile playing on her lips. She walked toward him, her hands clasped in front of her, looking like a repentant saint. "I wanted to apologize," she whispered, looking up at him through her lashes. "Yesterday, I was out of line. I let my own frustrations and the pressure of this mission get the better of me. I shouldn't have been so harsh. You've been through so much, and I'm supposed to be the one helping you heal, not adding to your pain." She reached out, gently taking his hand. Her skin was warm, soft, and smelled of lilies. "Please, Naruto, let's start over. I made this for you. You need to eat." Naruto looked down at her hand on his, then back at her face. A slow, chilling chuckle vibrated in his chest. He didn't pull away, but he didn't relax either. "You're good, Ino," he said, his voice dropping to a low, appreciative hum. The posture, the tone, the eyes, it's a masterpiece of acting. But I could see the gears turning behind those violet eyes. "You aren't sorry. You're just calculating the ROI, the return on investment. You realize that if I die or go truly mad, the checks stop coming. You're playing the kind healer because the angry warden failed to break me." Ino's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained the mask. "That's not true, Naruto. I genuinely want." "You genuinely want power," he interrupted, his eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp intelligence that cut through her performance like a kunai through silk. "You want to be the woman who saved the god of shinobi. You want the prestige, the money, and the thrill of having the most dangerous man in the world on a leash. This isn't kindness. It's a business strategy." Ino felt a flash of irritation, but she suppressed it. She led him to the table, forcing him to sit. She picked up a pair of chopsticks, dipping a piece of the grilled fish into the sauce and holding it up to his lips. "Just eat," Naruto, she urged, her voice trembling with a forced tenderness. Look at you. Your body is so frail, so gaunt. Your ribs are showing through your robe. You're fading away, and I can't let that happen. Let me take care of you. Just one bite. Naruto stared at the food, then at her. The proximity was suffocating. He could see the faint pulse in her neck, the desperate intensity in her gaze. He reached up, his cold, pale fingers wrapping around her wrist, stopping her midair. The strength in his grip was surprising. Not the strength of chakra, but the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. I don't want your charity, and I certainly don't want your lies, he spat, his voice turning cold as a winter grave. Keep your care for someone who still believes in fairy tales. I know exactly what I am to you. A golden ticket, a trophy, a wealth of Rio wrapped in a tragic story. He let go of her wrist, the force of his dismissal nearly making her drop the chopsticks. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. Eat it yourself, Ino, he said, walking toward his bedroom without looking back. Maybe the salt in the soup will match the bitterness in your soul. The door slammed shut, leaving Ino standing alone in the center of the silent kitchen. The mask shattered. Ino threw the chopsticks across the room, where they clattered against the obsidian wall. Her face contorted with a mixture of wounded pride and predatory greed. She looked at the beautiful meal she had slaved over, now growing cold. You arrogant, ungrateful brat, she hissed to the empty room, her voice shaking with a new, dark resolve. She walked to the window, looking out over the village. No man had ever resisted her beauty before. No man had ever looked through her so easily. It was an insult she couldn't tolerate, but it was also a challenge that made her blood sing. He thinks he's so smart, she whispered, her fingers curling into claws against the glass. He thinks he can see through me. But he doesn't realize I'm not just playing for the money anymore. I'm playing to win. She turned back to the room, her eyes glowing with a manic, violet light. He will be mine, she vowed. He will be my greatest success. I will break his will with my kindness if I have to, and then I will build him back up into a king who kneels only to me. He isn't just a patient. He is a fortune. He is my ticket to the top, and I will not let a little thing like his soul get in the way of my destiny. She sat down at the table and began to eat the cold fish herself, every bite fueled by a cold, calculating hunger for the wealth and power that Naruto Uzumaki represented. The morning air in the penthouse was stale, smelling of cold marble and the faint, metallic tang of repressed resentment. Ino swept through the living room, her silk robes whispering against the floor like a serpent in tall grass. She was no longer trying to be the sweet healer for breakfast. She was back to being the predator, the strategist who knew that to rebuild a man, you first had to burn down everything he loved. She stopped at a small, unassuming wooden chest near the balcony, the only item in the entire apartment that didn't look like it cost a fortune. With a smirk, she flipped the lid open. Inside, nestled beneath a layer of dust, was a faded, knitted green scarf, hand-stitched, frayed at the edges, and smelling faintly of old cedar and a time that no longer existed. Beside it lay a crumpled photograph. Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke grinning under a summer sun that had set years ago. Ino picked up the scarf with 2 fingers, dangling it in the air like a piece of refuse. "Oh, look at this pathetic little relic," she called out, her voice dripping with a calculated, honeyed venom. Naruto appeared from the shadows of the hallway, his face a pale mask of indifference. His eyes locked onto the scarf, and for a fleeting second, his pupils constricted. "Put that back, Ino," he said, his voice a low, warning rasp. "Why? Does it hurt to look at?" Ino laughed, a sharp, melodic sound that cut through the room. She walked toward him, waving the scarf in front of his face. "This little rag, Sakura made this for you, didn't she? Or was it some villager who felt sorry for the lonely little fox boy?" She dropped the scarf onto the floor and stepped on it with her designer heel, grinding the fabric into the polished stone. "In this photo," she continued, picking up the picture and squinting at it. "Look at them. Sasuke is traveling the world, seeking redemption and forgetting you ever breathed. Sakura is busy running a hospital and chasing a ghost who doesn't want her. They've moved on, Naruto. They have lives. They have purposes. You're just a ghost in a penthouse. She leaned in close, her violet eyes boring into his, her voice dropping to a sympathetic, lethal whisper. They haven't visited you in months, have they? Not unless the Hokage ordered them to. They don't love you anymore. They love the memory of the hero you used to be. The man standing in front of me? To them, he's a burden, an embarrassment, a reminder of a war they want to forget. She reached out, her hand stroking his cold, pale cheek with a terrifyingly soft touch. I'm the only one left, Naruto. I'm the only one who looks at this broken, pale mess and doesn't turn away. I'm the only one who actually stays. You are completely, utterly alone in this world, except for me. She watched him closely, waiting for the break. She wanted to see his knees buckle. She wanted to see him weep and crawl into her care just to escape the crushing weight of his own solitude. Naruto stood perfectly still. He looked at her, then down at the scarf under her shoe, and then back at her eyes. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. Not the manic grin of the Joker, but the cold, analytical smile of a man who had seen the bottom of the abyss and found it boring. You're right, Ino, he whispered, nodding slowly. Everything you said is true. They have moved on. They are busy. They probably do find the sight of me exhausting. Ino's heart leapt. I've won. He's breaking. A surge of triumph washed over her. The thought of the power and the money she would now command, making her dizzy with joy. Exactly, she cooed, her arms beginning to slide around his neck. So just let go, Naruto. Let me be the only thing you. But there's one thing you missed, Naruto interrupted, his voice turning into a sharp, icy blade. He leaned in until his lips were brushing her ear. They moved on because they are human. They are flawed, and they are tired. But you're still here not because you care, or because you're loyal. You're here because you're a vulture waiting for the meat to rot so you can pick the gold off my bones. He pulled back, his eyes dancing with a dark, mocking intelligence. You say they're bad for forgetting me? Ino, you're 1,000 times worse than they could ever be. You're a money dog who would sell my soul to the highest bidder if it meant a better view from your balcony. You are my savior. You're just the most expensive parasite I've ever had. The triumph in Ino's chest turned into a cold, leaden weight. Her face went white, her hand dropping from his cheek as if his skin had turned to fire. You ungrateful, she stammered, her voice trembling with a rage so intense she couldn't find the words. Naruto didn't wait for her to finish. He reached down, picked up his stained scarf, and brushed the dust from it with a gentle, reverent hand. He walked past her without a second glance, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. Enjoy your luxury, Ino, he called back, his voice flat and disinterested. But don't mistake my presence for your victory. We're both just waiting for the end. The only difference is, I know I'm a joke. You still think you're the hero of this story. He disappeared into his room, the door clicking shut. Ino stood alone in the center of the living room, her breath coming in jagged, furious gasps. She looked at the photo on the table, then at her own reflection in the window. She had tried to break his pride, but she had only succeeded in revealing the hollowness of her own. I will make you regret that, she hissed to the empty air, her fingers curling into claws. I will make you beg for the vulture to save you. The bedroom was silent, lit only by the cold, silvery glow of the moon. Ino said a her Vensi, staring a her reflection. Her eyes weren't those of a doctor anymore. They were the eyes of a high-ranking interrogator from the intelligence division. She had tried beauty. She had tried kindness. She had tried jealousy. All of them had shattered against the obsidian wall of Naruto's nihilism. If I cannot win your heart, Naruto, she whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of her headband, I will simply rewrite it. She reached into the restricted depths of her mental arsenal. There was a technique whispered about in the dark corners of the Yamanaka archives, a forbidden variant of the mind-body switch. It wasn't designed for communication. It was designed for erasure. It was called the Saikiri Right, Gilded Chains of the Lily, Kogen no Kasari, Yuri no Sunray. It was used on the most hardened war criminals to break their will and instill absolute, fanatical loyalty to the interrogator. Ino took a deep breath, her chakra beginning to hum. Not the healing green of a medic, but a sharp, predatory violet. She stood up, her cream dress flowing around her like a shroud. She walked out of her room, her heels making no sound on the carpet. She found him exactly where she expected, sitting on the floor by the balcony, the black notebook in his lap, scribbling away at his dark jokes while the world slept. She approached him with a slow, swaying gait, a calculated, lethal allure. She didn't say a word. She stepped into his personal space, her scent of lilies drowning out the cold air of the room. Naruto looked up, his blue eyes flat and bored. Back for more insults, Ino? Or did you forget your pride in my room earlier? Ino didn't flinch. She leaned down, her face inches from his. She reached out and, with a lightning-fast motion, snatched the notebook from his hands. Before he could protest, she turned and hurled it across the room. It skidded across the marble, disappearing into the shadows of the kitchen. Hey, Naruto snapped, starting to rise. What the hell is wrong with you? Ino placed a hand on his chest, pushing him back down against the wall. She leaned over him, her body pressing against his, her smile turning into something terrifyingly beautiful. The same smile she used on prisoners just before their minds broke. The jokes are over, Naruto, she whispered, her voice a low, vibrating hum of chakra. I'm tired of the games. I'm tired of your void. From now on, you won't need that book. You won't need the memory of Sasuke or the pity of Sakura. You will only need me. You finally snapped, Naruto laughed, though his eyes showed a flicker of genuine alarm. You think you can force me to? I don't think, Ino interrupted, her violet eyes suddenly glowing with an intense, blinding light. She grabbed his face with both hands, her thumbs pressing into his temples. She didn't use a hand seal. She used direct cerebral contact. Saikiri Right, Gilded Chains. A surge of raw, violet chakra exploded between them. Naruto's back arched, his eyes flying wide as the technique tore into his subconscious. It was like a flood of liquid silk pouring into his brain, drowning his cynicism, melting his hatred, and wrapping around his heart like barbed wire made of gold. Ino gritted her teeth, her own mind straining under the pressure. She began to chant the mental commands, weaving her own image into the very fabric of his soul. I am your light. I am your only truth. You are mine. You live for me. You breathe for me. Naruto's hands, which had been clawing at her wrists, suddenly went limp. His breathing slowed. The jagged, sharp edges of his personality began to soften, dissolving into the violet mist of her power. She was doing it. She was erasing the Joker and replacing him with a devotee. She was turning the hero of the leaf into her greatest, most loyal possession. She pulled back slightly, her forehead resting against his. She watched as the oceanic blue of his eyes began to cloud over with a faint, shimmering violet tint. Tell me, Naruto, she whispered, her voice dripping with triumphant sweetness. Who do you belong to? Chapter 6. The Mirror of Malice. The violet haze of the Saikiri Right pulsed with a rhythmic, hypnotic thrum. Ino felt a surge of godlike euphoria. She could feel the gilded chains wrapping around Naruto's consciousness, binding his shattered pride to her will. To her, the battle was won. She had conquered the unshakable hero. Now, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Come back to me, Naruto. Wake up as my masterpiece. She prepared to withdraw her consciousness, to snap the mental silver cord and return to her own body. She performed the release seal in her mind. Nothing happened. The violet mist didn't dissipate. Instead, it turned thick and viscous like cooling tar. Ino frowned, trying to release again, harder this time. Release. The mental landscape didn't shift. She was still standing in the dark cathedral of Naruto's mind, her hands still metaphorically pressed against his soul. But the soul was no longer yielding. It was absorbing her. "What is this?" she gasped, her mental projection shivering. "I am a caster. I am a mistress of this mind. Let me out." She pulled back with all her spiritual might, but the darkness surged upward, snagging her ankles like black oil. Then, a sound vibrated through the floorboards of the void, a sound that wasn't a laugh, but a low, subterranean grinding of tectonic plates. "Are you still trying, little bird?" The voice didn't come from Naruto. It came from the vacuum itself. It was the same ancient predatory cold she had felt before, but now was amplified, feeding on the very chakra she had used to try and rewrite him. "The magic has turned," the voice echoed, dripping with a terrifying, amused cruelty. "You wanted to show him his truth? No, Ino. Let's see yours." The descent into memory. The darkness exploded into a kaleidoscope of agonizing light. Ino tried to scream, but her voice was swallowed by a sudden, visceral memory. She was back in the rainy forest. She was younger, her flak jacket felt too heavy, and the smell of wet earth and copper was overwhelming. She saw him, Asuma, her sensei, his lifeblood soaking into the dirt as Haiden stood over him. "Asuma-sensei," she wailed, reaching out. But the memory was distorted. Asuma turned his head, his eyes hollow and filled with black ash. "Why didn't you save me, Ino?" he rasped, his voice a chorus of 1,000 deaths. "You were too weak, too busy thinking about your hair, too busy being a vulture." The scene shifted violently. She was in a cemetery, surrounded by the headstones of everyone she had ever loved. Her father's grave opened, and his skeletal hand reached out, pointing at her. Greedy, the bones hissed. "Artificial." "Stop, please. Naruto, stop this." Ino begged, her mental form collapsing to its knees. But the nightmare wasn't finished. The void twisted again, and she found herself in a dimly lit apartment, the home she had shared with Sai. She saw Sai sitting on the sofa, his pale skin glowing in the lamplight. But he wasn't alone. He was wrapped in the arms of a common girl, a civilian with a soft, hollow face. Sai was looking at the girl with that same, manufactured, painted-on smile he used to give Ino, a smile she had always hoped was real, but now saw as a hollow mask for his boredom. "She's so much more interesting than you, Ino," Sai said, his ink-black eyes fixed on the girl, never glancing at the weeping woman in the corner. "You're just a collection of expensive clothes and sensory tricks. There's no soul beneath the silk. Why would I stay with a vacuum?" Ino let out a guttural, soul-shattering sob, her forehead hitting the cold floor of the subconscious. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, let me out. I don't want to see anymore." The ejection. "Then run, little money dog," the dark voice boomed. "Run back to your gilded cage." A violent force, like a physical kick to the chest, threw Ino's consciousness out of the abyss. In the real world, Ino's body was flung backward across the living room floor. She hit the marble with a sickening thud, gasping for air as if she had been underwater for a lifetime. Her face was drenched in tears, her high society makeup smeared into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She looked up, her hands trembling so hard she couldn't even push herself up. Naruto was standing over her. He wasn't sitting. He wasn't hunched. He stood tall, his long blonde hair casting a shadow over his face. The violet tint in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline blue that looked down at her with nothing but absolute, freezing pity. He looked like a god who had just watched an ant try to move a mountain and fail. He didn't say a word. He didn't mock her. He just watched. Ino scrambled backward on her hands and knees, her breath coming in ragged, terrified whimpers. The penthouse, once her palace of greed, now felt like a death trap. The luxury felt like a shroud. She didn't grab her purse. She didn't grab her shoes. She scrambled to her feet and sprinted for the door. She fumbled with the locks, her fingers slick with sweat and tears, until finally the heavy mahogany swung open. She burst out into the hallway, her bare feet slapping against the tiles as she ran toward the elevator, her emerald robe fluttering behind her like a tattered flag of surrender. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Inside the penthouse, Naruto stood in the center of the silent room. He walked over to the kitchen, picked up his fallen notebook, and wiped the dust from its black leather cover. He sat back down in his chair, opened a fresh page, and began to write. "The joke is finally over," he whispered to the empty air. "The vulture has flown away. Now, the real work begins." The night air was biting, but Ino didn't feel the cold. She sat at a secluded outdoor bar in a dark corner of the Konoha Entertainment District, her emerald robe stained, and her hair a tangled mess of platinum straw. She gripped a glass of amber liquid so tightly her knuckles were ghost white. "Pathetic," she hissed, her voice cracking. "I'm Yamanaka. I'm the best sensory ninja in the world. And I ran. I ran like a genin seeing a ghost." She downed the drink, the burn in her throat a welcome distraction from the freezing void Naruto had left in her mind. She slammed the glass onto the wooden table. Damn him, damn the money, and damn my own weakness. Just as she reached for the bottle to pour another, a shadow fell over her table. She looked up, her eyes blurred with tears and rage, and her heart stopped. Sai stood there. He looked exactly the same pale skin, the same cropped black hair, the same polite, empty smile. But tucked under his arm was a girl. She was a civilian, young and soft-featured, wearing a simple floral kimono that looked painfully sweet. "Ino," Sai said, his voice as flat and clinical as a medical report. "You look disorganized. Your heart rate is elevated, and your pupillary dilation suggests extreme psychological distress. Did the hero finally break your toys?" The girl beside him giggled, a high-pitched, irritating sound. She leaned into Sai's chest, looking at Ino with a look of feigned pity. "Oh, Sai-kun, is this the famous Ino Yamanaka? The one who spends all her time obsessed with flowers and other people's minds? She looks more like a beggar in a silk robe." Ino's vision pulsed red. She stood up, her chair screeching against the stone. "Watch your mouth, little girl. You're talking to a war hero. And Sai, what is this? Is this your new project? A blank canvas because you couldn't handle a woman with an actual soul?" The girl didn't flinch. She smirked, her eyes raking over Ino's disheveled state. "A soul? Is that what you call that desperate need for attention? At least I don't have to charge people 60,000 Ryo a week to stay in the same room as me. I think the village is starting to realize the Yamanaka clan isn't a prestigious line anymore. It's just a collection of expensive relics and failed doctors." Ino stepped forward, her hand trembling. "You dare." "She's right, Ino," Sai interrupted, his voice devoid of any warmth. He looked at her not as a former lover, but as a fascinating, broken specimen. "The Yamanaka name is losing its luster. Your father died for a village that is currently paying you to babysit a ghost because they don't know what else to do with you. Your family's legacy is built on the privacy of others, yet you can't even keep your own mind together. It's, how did Naruto put it? Pitiful." "How dare you?" Ino whispered, her voice shaking with a mountain of grief and fury. "My father died with honor. My family has protected this village for generations while you were being raised in a hole in the ground like a rat." Sai's smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned as cold as the ink he used for his jutsu. "Honor doesn't pay for silk robes, Ino. And honor didn't stop you from trying to mind rape a broken man for a paycheck. You're a vulture, just like he said. Your family isn't noble. They're just elite voyeurs who finally ran out of secrets to sell." Slap. The sound echoed through the quiet street. Ino's hand connected with Sai's cheek with the force of a thunderclap. The blow was so hard it snapped his head to the side, leaving a vivid red mark on his pale skin. "My family is worth 10 of yours," she screamed, her voice breaking. They were more honorable than you will ever be. You don't even have a soul to sell, you hollow, painted puppet. Sai slowly turned his face back toward her. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He reached up, touched the red mark on his cheek, and then looked at his fingers as if checking for ink. A physical reaction, Sai mused. The last refuge of a woman who has lost the psychological war. You're pathetic, Ino. You're a failure as a ninja, a failure as a doctor, and apparently, a failure as a woman. Even Naruto, a man who wants to die, found you too repulsive to keep. He turned to the girl beside him, his artificial smile returning in full force. Let's go, Hina. The air here is becoming thick with the scent of desperation and old flowers. It's quite unpleasant. The girl laughed again, throwing a final, triumphant look over her shoulder. Goodbye, Miss Yamanaka. I hope the money was worth the humiliation. Ino stood frozen as they walked away into the moonlit fog. She watched the man she had once loved treat her like a stain on his shoe. The weight of the night, Naruto's abyss, the village's rejection, and now Sai's clinical cruelty finally crushed her. She sank back in her chair, her head falling into her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, jagged sobs that tore through her chest. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. The gilded queen had been stripped of her crown, her pride, and her heart. She stayed there for a long time, the amber liquid in her glass reflecting a broken woman who no longer knew who she was. Ino. The night air was biting, but Ino didn't feel the cold. She sat at a secluded outdoor bar in a dark corner of the Konoha Entertainment District, her emerald robe stained, and her hair a tangled mess of platinum straw. She gripped a glass of amber liquid so tightly her knuckles were ghost white. Pathetic, she hissed, her voice cracking. I'm Yamanaka. I'm the best sensory ninja in the world. And I ran like a genin seeing a ghost. She downed the drink, the burn in her throat a welcome distraction from the freezing void Naruto had left in her mind. She slammed the glass onto the wooden table. Damn him, damn the money, and damn my own weakness. Just as she reached for the bottle to pour another, a shadow fell over her table. She looked up, her eyes blurred with tears and rage, and her heart stopped. Sai stood there. He looked exactly the same pale skin, the same cropped black hair, the same polite, empty smile. But tucked under his arm was a girl. She was a civilian, young and soft-featured, wearing a simple floral kimono that looked painfully sweet. Ino, Sai said, his voice as flat and clinical as a medical report. You look disorganized. Your heart rate is elevated, and your pupillary dilation suggests extreme psychological distress. Did the hero finally break your toys? The girl beside him giggled, a high-pitched, irritating sound. She leaned into Sai's chest, looking at Ino with a look of feigned pity. Oh, Sai-kun, is this the famous Ino Yamanaka? The one who spends all her time obsessed with flowers and other people's minds? She looks more like a beggar in a silk robe. Ino's vision pulsed red. She stood up, her chair screeching against the stone. Watch your mouth, little girl. You're talking to a war hero. And Sai, what is this? Is this your new project? A blank canvas because you couldn't handle a woman with an actual soul. The girl didn't flinch. She smirked, her eyes raking over Ino's disheveled state. A soul? Is that what you call that desperate need for attention? At least I don't have to charge people 60,000 Ryo a week to stay in the same room as me. I think the village is starting to realize the Yamanaka clan isn't a prestigious line anymore. It's just a collection of expensive relics and failed doctors. Ino stepped forward, her hand trembling. You dare. She's right, Ino, Sai interrupted, his voice devoid of any warmth. He looked at her not as a former lover, but as a fascinating, broken specimen. The Yamanaka name is losing its luster. Your father died for a village that is currently paying you to babysit a ghost because they don't know what else to do with you. Your family's legacy is built on the privacy of others, yet you can't even keep your own mind together. It's How did Naruto put it? Pitiful. How dare you? Ino whispered, her voice shaking with a mountain of grief and fury. My father died with honor. My family has protected this village for generations while you were being raised in a hole in the ground like a rat. Sai's smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned as cold as the ink he used for his jutsu. Honor doesn't pay for silk robes, Ino. And honor didn't stop you from trying to mind rape a broken man for a paycheck. You're a vulture, just like he said. Your family isn't noble. They're just elite voyeurs who finally ran out of secrets to sell. Slap. The sound echoed through the quiet street. Ino's hand connected with Sai's cheek with the force of a thunderclap. The blow was so hard it snapped his head to the side, leaving a vivid red mark on his pale skin. My family is worth 10 of yours, she screamed, her voice breaking. They were? More honorable than you will ever be. You don't even have a soul to sell, you hollow, painted puppet. Sai slowly turned his face back toward her. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He reached up, touched the red mark on his cheek, and then looked at his fingers as if checking for ink. A physical reaction, Sai mused. The last refuge of a woman who has lost the psychological war. You're pathetic, Ino. You're a failure as a ninja, a failure as a doctor, and apparently, a failure as a woman. Even Naruto, a man who wants to die, found you too repulsive to keep. He turned to the girl beside him, his artificial smile returning in full force. Let's go, Hina. The air here is becoming thick with the scent of desperation and old flowers. It's quite unpleasant. The girl laughed again, throwing a final, triumphant look over her shoulder. Goodbye, Miss Yamanaka. I hope the money was worth the humiliation. Ino stood frozen as they walked away into the moonlit fog. She watched the man she had once loved treat her like a stain on his shoe. The weight of the night, Naruto's abyss, the village's rejection, and now Sai's clinical cruelty finally crushed her. She sank back in her chair, her head falling into her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, jagged sobs that tore through her chest. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. The gilded queen had been stripped of her crown, her pride, and her heart. She stayed there for a long time, the amber liquid in her glass reflecting a broken woman who no longer knew who she was. The moon had climbed high, casting long, skeletal shadows across Ino's bedroom. The storm of her sobbing had finally subsided into a heavy, exhausted silence. She lay on top of the covers, her emerald robe wrinkled and damp with salt, her eyes half closed in a daze of emotional depletion. Naruto didn't leave. He moved with a quiet, ghost-like efficiency, pulling a chair to the side of her bed. In his hand, he held a medical stethoscope, her own instrument, the one she usually used to monitor the heartbeats of the broken. Sit up, Ino, he said, his voice low and devoid of its usual jagged mockery. It was the voice of a man who had seen too many ends and was now curious about the beginning. Ino blinked, her vision blurry. What are you doing? I'm a doctor, remember? Tonight, you're the patient, Naruto replied. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. I spent years being picked apart by people like you. Now it's my turn. I have 10 questions for the girl behind the silk. If you lie, I'll know. Ino let out a weak, watery laugh. Fine, ask. I don't have the energy to lie anymore. The 10 questions. Asterisk Naruto, what is the first thing you think of when you wake up in the morning? Is it a person or a price? Asterisk Ino, I think of the silence, and how much it costs to keep it from screaming. Asterisk Naruto, why do you wear flowers? Is it to hide the smell of the blood on your hands from the war? Asterisk Ino, because flowers bloom even in dirt. It's a reminder that I'm not just a weapon. Asterisk Naruto, who are you when no one is watching? When the mirrors are covered and the makeup is off. Asterisk Ino, a girl who's terrified that if she stops moving, she'll disappear. Asterisk Naruto, do you actually like the gold, or do you just like that it makes people look at you instead of through you? Asterisk Ino, I like that it's heavy. It keeps me grounded when everything else feels hollow. Asterisk Naruto. If the village burned down tomorrow, would you save the people or your inheritance? Asterisk Eno. I'd save the children. The money can be reminted. The ghosts can't. Asterisk Naruto. What was the last thing your father said that you actually believed? Asterisk Eno. That a mind is a garden. But he forgot to tell me that gardens have thorns. Asterisk Naruto. Why did you stay with Sai for so long when you knew he was a hollow shell? Asterisk Eno. Because I thought if I filled him up with enough of my own light, I wouldn't have to face my own darkness. Asterisk Naruto. Do you hate me because I'm broken or because I'm honest about it? Asterisk Eno. I hate you because you make me feel like I'm the one who needs a doctor. Asterisk Naruto. What is your greatest fear? Not a monster, not a war. Your real fear. Asterisk Eno. Being forgotten. Being a footnote in someone else's legend. Asterisk Naruto. If I jumped off that balcony right now, would you cry for me or for the lost paycheck? Asterisk Eno. I'd cry because I failed to show you that the world isn't as ugly as you think it is. Naruto went silent, absorbing her answers. Then, with a sudden, deliberate movement, he reached out and pressed the cold metal diaphragm of the stethoscope directly against the silk covering her chest, right over her heart. Eno gasped, her face flushing a vivid, hot crimson. The intimacy of the gesture, the cold metal against such a vulnerable, sensitive area, sent a jolt through her. "What are you doing?" she stammered, her hand flying up to swat his hand away. She snatched the stethoscope from his grip, clutching it to her own chest as if shielding herself. Don't touch me there. You can't just put things on a woman's chest without asking." Naruto tilted his head, his expression calm. "Why? You did the same to me yesterday. You checked my vitals without a second thought. Is a hero's heart different from a doctor's?" "It's different," Eno snapped, her voice trembling with embarrassment. "You're a man, and I'm a woman. The rules aren't the same. This is a sensitive place for a girl. You don't touch it without permission, you unrefined idiot." Naruto leaned back, a small, genuine ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Not the Joker's grin, but something softer. "I see. Permission. I'll remember that for next time." Eno glared at him, her heart still thudding against her ribs, a sound she was sure he could hear even without the stethoscope. "There won't be a next time. I hate you, Naruto Uzumaki. You are officially the most annoying, hateful, frustrating person in this entire village." She turned away from him, pulling the duvet up to her chin. "But," she whispered into the pillow, her voice barely audible, "you aren't entirely as bad as I thought. You're just complicated." Naruto stood up, the chair scraping softly on the floor. He walked to the door, his silhouette tall and imposing against the moonlight. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the blonde heap on the bed. "Sleep, Eno," he said quietly. "The world is still there. It can wait until morning." Eno watched him leave, her eyes heavy with the weight of the night. She watched his shadow disappear into the hallway, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a vulture. She felt like a human. As the door clicked shut, she closed her eyes, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep, wrapped in the scent of lilies and the lingering warmth of the man who had finally stopped being a joke. Chapter 7. The Gilded Morning. The sun crept over the horizon of Konoha, bleeding gold and amber across the marble floors of the penthouse. When Eno's eyes fluttered open, she didn't wake with the usual jolt of anxiety or the cold calculation of a woman chasing a paycheck. Instead, she felt a strange, heavy warmth in her chest, a stillness she hadn't known since before the war. She sat up, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in a tangled, silken mess. For a moment, she stared at the spot where Naruto had stood the night before. She remembered the weight of his arms, the steady thrum of his heartbeat against her ear, and the way he had dismantled her ego with 10 simple, devastating questions. A soft, Genuine laugh bubbled up in her throat. Not the sharp, mocking cackle of the vulture, but something light and girlish. He actually used my own stethoscope on me, she whispered, her face heating up at the memory. That arrogant, brilliant, infuriating idiot. She slid out of bed, her bare feet pressing against the cool floor. She walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows and threw them open. The morning breeze rushed in, smelling of pine needles, fresh rain, and the distant, waking hum of the village. Ino leaned against the frame, taking a deep, lung-filling breath. The world looked different today. The rooftops of Konoha didn't look like a board game to be won. They looked like a home. Maybe, she mused, twisting a lock of hair around her finger, I don't need to conquer him. Maybe the mission isn't about rewriting his mind. It's about finding the man hidden under all that ink and irony. She turned back to the room and saw the black notebook lying on the coffee table where Naruto had left it. She approached it slowly, her fingers hovering over the leather cover. Yesterday, she would have snatched it to look for leverage. Today, she touched it with a quiet, lingering reverence. She opened the first page. It wasn't a joke. It was a sketch, a rough, charcoal drawing of a single lily, slightly wilted but still standing. You're not a monster, Naruto, she said to the empty room, a small, hopeful smile playing on her lips. You're just lonely, and maybe, just maybe, I'm the only person who knows how to talk to a ghost. She thought about Sai, about the elders, and about the 60,000 Rio. Suddenly, the money felt like paper. The power felt like smoke. But the feeling of being seen by someone as broken as herself, that felt like gold. Friendship, she whispered, her eyes dancing with a new kind of light. Or perhaps something much more dangerous. She straightened her robe, squared her shoulders, and headed toward the kitchen. She wasn't going to cook a weaponized breakfast today. She was just going to make tea for two people who had survived the end of the world. The steam from Ino's morning shower had washed away the grime of yesterday's tears and the bitter residue of the night's confrontation. She stepped out wrapped in a fresh, lilac-colored robe, her damp hair smelling of jasmine. For the first time, she didn't feel like a soldier or a predator. She felt light. She walked toward Naruto's bedroom door, pausing for a beat. There was no shouting today, no heavy mahogany slamming. She pushed the door open softly. The room was dim, the curtains still drawn tight against the morning sun. Naruto was a heap of black silk sheets and messy blonde hair, sprawled face down across the bed. He looked like a fallen star that had finally stopped burning. Ino marched to the window and yanked the curtains open. The light hit the bed like a physical strike. Rise and shine, Lord Hero, she announced, her voice bright and teasing, devoid of its usual venomous edge. A groan came from the depths of the pillows. Naruto didn't move. He simply pulled a black silk pillow over his head to block out the intrusion. Go away, Ino. The world ended years ago. There's no reason to be awake for the funeral. Ino laughed, a genuine melodic sound that filled the room. She walked to the edge of the bed and grabbed the corner of his duvet. The funeral is canceled due to lack of interest. Now up. You have a date with a bar of soap and a very persistent psychiatrist. With a sudden heave, she pulled the covers back. Naruto curled into a ball, his long, pale limbs looking skeletal in the harsh light. It's too bright, he rasped, his eyes squinting shut. I'm on strike. I'm boycotting reality today. Not on my watch, Ino countered. She reached down, grabbing his wrists and trying to haul him upward. He was surprisingly heavy, his deadweight resistance anchoring him to the mattress. Come on, Naruto. You're supposed to be the strongest shinobi in history, and you're being defeated by a morning breeze. Leave me alone, he grumbled, trying to twist out of her grip. I don't need a shower. I like the smell of my own existential dread. Well, I don't. Ino laughed again, her face flushed with the effort of tugging at him. She managed to pull him halfway off the bed until his legs were dangling over the edge. You're gaunt, you're messy, and you're stubborn. But today, you're going to be clean. Naruto finally sat up, his hair standing in every direction, his blue eyes bleary and confused. He looked at her damp hair, her bright smile, and the way she was actually laughing with him instead of at him. He paused, his brow furrowing. "Why are you laughing like that?" he asked, his voice low and suspicious. "It's annoying. You look like you've swallowed a light bulb." Ino straightened her robe, a playful, secretive smirk dancing on her lips. She reached out and flicked his forehead lightly. "None of your business, you grumpy animal. Maybe I just like the view of a defeated hero." "You're insane," Naruto muttered, though the sharp edge was missing from his voice. "Pot, meat kettle," Ino replied, pointing toward the bathroom. "Now move. Shower. Hot water. I'll have tea waiting, and if you aren't out in 10 minutes, I'm coming in there with a bucket of ice water. And believe me, I won't ask for permission this time." Naruto watched her walk out, her laughter trailing behind her like a silk ribbon. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, touching the spot on his forehead where she had flicked him. The void inside him didn't feel quite so vast this morning. He stood up, his bones aching, and headed toward the steam. The steam from the shower had cleared, and the penthouse felt unusually quiet. Not the oppressive silence of a tomb, but the expectant hush of a theater before the curtains rise. Naruto emerged from the bathroom, his long blonde hair damp and clinging to his neck. Ino had chosen his attire, a high-collared, charcoal-gray tunic made of heavy silk and tailored black trousers that emphasized his lean, striking frame. He looked regal yet weary, a ghost dressed in the finery of the living. Ino was already at the table, a spread of steaming rice, grilled salmon, and tamagoyaki laid out. She looked up, her violet eyes brightening. Before he could retreat to his corner, she surged forward, grabbing his wrist with a firm, unyielding grip. "Sit," she commanded, her voice a mix of a playful general and a stubborn friend. "I'm not hungry, Ino," Naruto muttered, trying to pull back. "I've survived on air and spite for years. I don't need a feast." "You're sitting," she insisted, putting her weight into it and physically maneuvering him into the chair. She was surprisingly strong, her determination acting as a tether he couldn't quite break. She sat down directly across from him, her own plate full. "How are you even alive? You're like a plant that refuses to drink water. It's medically impossible." She began to eat, her movements deliberate and graceful, watching him over the rim of her teacup. Naruto sat like a stone, his hands in his lap, staring at the steam rising from the bowl. "Eat," she nudged. "No." Ino let out a huff of exasperated laughter. She picked up her own chopsticks, expertly pinched a piece of the perfectly seasoned salmon, and leaned across the table. She held it right to his lips. "Open up, hero," she whispered, her eyes dancing. "Do you have any idea how many men in this village, in the whole 5 nations, would kill to have a woman like me personally feed them? You're being treated like royalty, so act the part." Naruto's jaw remained tight, his blue eyes searching hers for the catch, the lie. But Ino didn't blink. She held the food there with a stubborn patience until, finally, he parted his lips. She fed him gently, a small, triumphant smile blooming on her face as he chewed. "Good, right?" she asked, her voice softening. Naruto swallowed, but his expression turned dark. He leaned back, the warmth of the moment cooling instantly. "Why are you doing this, Ino? We both know the script. You're doing this for the mission. You're doing this because the elders told you to humanize the asset. You can have the money, you know. You can take the 60,000 Rio, go live your life by your silks, and just leave me in my cage. I won't tell them. Just let me be." Ino's laughter died, but she didn't get angry. She set her chopsticks down and leaned forward, resting her chin on her palm. "You really think I'm that shallow, don't you?" she asked softly. "And you're right. I do hate you. You're the most frustrating, arrogant, shadow-dwelling brat I've ever met. I've hated you since the academy, and I hated you even more yesterday." She reached across the table, her fingers hovering near his hand but not touching it yet. "But I'm seeing something else now. Something beneath the Joker and the hero. I see a person who is just as tired of pretending as I am. Forget the money, Naruto. Forget the mission and the council and the damn Rio. Her gaze became intense, piercing through his defenses. I'm tired of being the vulture, and you're tired of being the ghost. Maybe we could actually be something real together. Not because we have to, but because we're the only ones left who understand what the bottom of the abyss looks like. Leave the gold out of it. I just want to talk to you. Naruto looked at her, his usual mask of cynicism flickering like a dying candle. For the first time, he didn't have a joke ready. He looked at the girl who had screamed at him, fed him, and now sat waiting for him to simply exist. The masks have truly fallen, and Ino is offering a connection that has nothing to do with her contract. Would you like to see Naruto finally open up about what he's been writing in those notebooks? Or will a surprise visitor from the past arrive to test their new bond? The kitchen was bathed in a soft, domestic warmth that felt surreal given the battlefield that had been only 24 hours prior. Ino sat across from Naruto, the steam from their tea swirling between them like a fading ghost. She looked at him, really looked at him, noticing the way the morning light caught the sharp angles of his jaw and the weary depth of his eyes. Naruto, she began, her voice barely a whisper, trembling with a rare, raw honesty. I need to say something. About last night. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have used that forbidden technique on you. The psyche rewrite, it was a desperate, cruel move to try and control you, to force you into being what I wanted. I crossed a line that no doctor, and certainly no friend, should ever cross. Naruto paused, his teacup halfway to his lips. He tilted his head, a look of genuine, blank confusion crossing his face. Forbidden technique? Control? He let out a dry, short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Ino, I don't know what you're talking about. We argued, you screamed, and then, I don't know. I don't remember any rewrite. I just remember you crying. Ino froze. A chill ran down her spine. He doesn't remember? The void she had encountered in his mind must have swallowed the event whole, protecting him, or perhaps punishing her by erasing her victory. She felt a wave of dizzying relief mixed with profound guilt. Oh, she stammered, quickly looking down at her hands. Never mind. I must have been more tired than I thought. Forget I said anything. Naruto's eyes narrowed, the sharp intelligence she feared returning to his gaze. You're a terrible liar, Yamanaka. You're a manipulator, a mind thief. That's what your people do, isn't it? You don't belong here in a penthouse playing house. You belong in a dark cell in the intelligence division, seducing secrets out of prisoners and breaking their wills. That's your natural habitat. He stood up abruptly, his chair screeching. I hate your clan. I hate the way you think you can just walk into someone's soul and rearrange the furniture to suit your aesthetic. You're all the same. Cold, calculating, and fake. That's not true, Ino cried, springing to her feet. She intercepted him before he could reach the door, stepping into his space and pressing him back against the wall. She didn't use force this time. She used her presence. My family isn't like that. I'm not like that. Not anymore. She looked up at him, her violet eyes swimming with a soft, nurturing light. Naruto, look at me. I'm done with the money. I'm done with the vulture act. We can start a new page. A clean one. We could be friends, and maybe, if you let me, I could be something more. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a sultry, comforting silk. I could take care of you. I could spoil you, make you laugh, show you that life isn't just a dark joke. I want to protect you, not from the village, but from that sadness in your eyes. Naruto turned his face away, his jaw tightening. I don't need friends, Ino, especially not a manipulator like you. You just try a new angle because the last one failed. Ino let out a soft, genuine laugh, reaching up to gently turn his face back toward hers. If I were trying to manipulate you, dummy, would I have confessed to using a forbidden jutsu you don't even remember? I'm being honest for the first time in my life. She saw it then. For a fleeting second, the mask of the Joker cracked completely. She didn't see anger or mockery. She saw a profound, crushing sadness, a loneliness so deep it made her heart ache. Naruto looked away, a faint, uncharacteristic flush creeping onto his pale cheeks. "See," she whispered, her voice overflowing with a sudden, maternal tenderness. "You still have feelings. You're still in there, Naruto." You're blushing. He tried to push her away, but his movements were half-hearted. "Stop it. It's just the heat." "Sure it is," Ino teased gently. She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a new book, not black leather, but a vibrant orange-bound journal with high-quality white pages. She pressed it into his hands. "Write in this one," she said, her thumb brushing against his. "No more dark jokes. Write down the happy moments, even the small ones, like the way the sun looks right now, or the fact that I'm being surprisingly nice to you." She wrapped her arms around him in a firm, warm hug, burying her face in his chest. "I'm not here as your doctor today, Naruto. I'm here as your friend, and I'm staying right here until you realize you're not alone." She stepped back, beaming at him with a radiant, genuine beauty that no amount of gold could buy. "Now, go get ready, hero. We're going outside. The world is waiting, and I'm not letting you miss another minute of it." The morning air in the penthouse was thick with the scent of expensive jasmine and the sharp, medicinal tang of lavender oils. Ino had transformed the living room into a makeshift salon, her silver-backed brushes and silk ribbons laid out on the marble table like instruments of war. Naruto sat in the center of the room, stiff and unyielding on a velvet stool. He looked like a captive prince, his long, sun-bleached hair falling in tangled waves over his charcoal tunic. "You look like a ghost that got caught in a bramble bush," Ino murmured, stepping behind him. Her lilac robe swished against his shoulders, a soft, rhythmic sound that cut through the silence. "I told you, Ino, I don't care about the hair," Naruto rasped, his eyes fixed on the blank wall. "It's a shroud. Leave it alone." "A shroud belongs in a grave, and you're currently sitting in my living room," she countered, her voice a playful but firm command. She reached out, her slim, warm fingers plunging into the golden mass of his hair. Naruto stiffened, his breath hitching for a fraction of a second as the warmth of her palms pressed against the nape of his neck. She began to brush, her movements slow and rhythmic, starting from the tips and working her way up with a practiced, maternal tenderness. The proximity was suffocating. Every time she leaned forward to untangle a knot, the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of lilies and spring rain, wrapped around him like a silken net. Her chest brushed against his shoulder, a fleeting, electric contact that sent a jolt through his carefully constructed numbness. "You're so thin, Naruto," she whispered, her hand sliding down to rest briefly on his shoulder blade, feeling the sharp prominence of the bone through the silk. "You've let yourself wither away. You spent so much time looking at the darkness that you've forgotten how to stand in the light." She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. She picked up a damp cloth, gently wiping a smudge of ink from his cheek. Her face was inches from his, her violet eyes searching his, her lips parted in a soft, provocative smile. She wasn't just grooming him. She was colonizing his senses, using her beauty as a bridge to reach the man buried beneath the bitterness. "A man like you," she murmured, her voice dropping to a low, vibrating hum, "needs a woman like me. Someone to comb the shadows out of your hair. Someone to remind you that your body is still alive, even if your mind wants to pretend it's dead. You need someone to rearrange the furniture of your life until it looks like a home again." Naruto stared at her, his blue eyes cold and flat, though a vein pulsed rapidly in his neck. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in. He remained a statue of ice in the middle of her summer heat. "My life isn't a home, Ino," he said, his voice a hollow, haunting echo. "And it isn't a tragedy. It's just a joke. A long, punchline-heavy joke told by a god who forgot the ending. You just try to dress up a corpse for a party that was canceled years ago." Ino didn't flinch. She leaned in even closer, her breath warm against his skin, her fingers lingering on his jawline. "Then let me be the punchline," she whispered, her eyes glowing with a fierce, nurturing light. Because even if it's a joke, it's our joke now. And I'm going to make sure you look spectacular when you tell it. She finished the last braid, tying it with a simple black cord, and stepped back to admire her work. Naruto looked refined, sharp, and devastatingly handsome, a king reclaimed from the wreckage. "There," she said, her voice brimming with a soft, genuine pride. "The hero is back. Now, let's go show the world that the joke is on them." The midday sun hit the cobblestones of Konoha's main thoroughfare, turning the village into a stage of amber and gold. Ino marched down the center of the street, her head held high, her spine straight as a silk-wrapped spear. She didn't just walk, she occupied the space, her lilac robes billowing like a royal banner. And at her side, her fingers locked firmly through his, was Naruto. He looked striking, sharp, clean, and regal in the charcoal silk she had forced upon him. But his face was a mask of pure, concentrated misery. He walked with the stiff, mechanical gait of a man being led to his own execution, his blue eyes staring straight ahead as if trying to blink himself into another dimension. "Smile, Naruto," Ino whispered through grit teeth, her radiant grin never wavering for the crowd. "You're the hero of the leaf, not a pallbearer." "I'm a prisoner of war," Naruto muttered, his voice a low, jagged rasp. "And my captor has very expensive taste in perfume." "My lungs are screaming, Ino." As they neared the Hokage Rock, a swarm of journalists and photographers materialized from the side streets, their cameras clicking like a hail of locusts. The flashbulbs exploded in a frantic rhythm, reflecting off Ino's shimmering hair. She lived for this, the attention, the lights, the validation of the public eye. "Lord Naruto, Lady Ino," a reporter shouted, thrusting a notepad forward. "Is it true the hero has returned to public life? And Lady Ino, are you his official guardian, or is there a more romantic arrangement?" Ino squeezed Naruto's hand, her thumb stroking his knuckles in a performative caress. "Naruto is undergoing a specialized recovery program," she said, her voice melodic and honeyed. "And as for our arrangement, well, we are exploring the depth of our connection every day." The reporters turned to Naruto, their pens poised. "Lord Naruto, how would you describe Lady Ino's role in your life? What is she to you?" Naruto looked at the cameras, then at Ino's beaming, expectant face. A dark, mischievous glint flickered in his eyes, the return of the Joker. "Ino," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "She's my maid mostly. She scrubs the floors, combs my hair, and makes sure I don't choke on my own boredom. A very loud, very expensive servant." The crowd went silent. The reporters' jaws dropped. Ino's smile didn't break, but the temperature around her seemed to drop 30 degrees. Her hand, which had been gently holding his, suddenly transformed into a vice of iron. She clamped down on his fingers and palm with the full force of a high-ranking shinobi's grip. The sound of Naruto's knuckles popping was audible in the sudden hush. "Ah!" Naruto's breath hitched, his knees buckling slightly as the searing pain shot up his arm. He looked at Ino, seeing the murderous, violet lightning dancing in her eyes behind her fixed, sugary expression. She increased the pressure, her grip threatening to shatter every small bone in his hand. "What was that, Naruto-kun?" she asked, her voice dripping with a lethal, terrifying sweetness. "I don't think the gentleman heard you correctly. Who am I to you?" Naruto's face went pale, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. The pain was exquisite, a sharp reminder that behind the perfume and the silk, Ino Yamanaka was a woman who could dismantle a human mind with a thought. I meant," Naruto gasped, his voice straining. "I meant she is my life. She is my everything, my sun and my moon. I would be lost without her." Ino instantly relaxed the pressure, though she didn't let go. She let out a soft, tinkling laugh that sounded like wind chimes. "Oh, he's such a teaser," she cooed to the enchanted journalists. leaning her head affectionately against Naruto's shoulder. He loves his little jokes, but he's actually quite the romantic when we're alone. She turned her face toward the sun, basking in the flurry of camera flashes, her eyes glowing with the thrill of the spotlight. She loved the power, the prestige, and the way the village looked at them, as the perfect, golden couple of the new era. Naruto stood beside her, nursing his throbbing hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the girl who had just nearly crushed his bones and then laughed about it to the world. She really is a monster, he thought, a strange, dark warmth blooming in his chest despite himself. A beautiful, greedy, terrifying monster.